Welcome to our Thursday, April 4th, public meeting of the Missoula Board of County Commissioners. I'd like to call today's meeting to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'm joined here today by my colleagues. I'm Commissioner Dave Stromer. I'm joined by Josh Slotnick on my right, your left, and Commissioner Juanita Vero on my left, your right. Missoula County acknowledges that this event today takes place in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. Cheryl, would you be so kind as to offer some introductory logistics for us?
Okay, thank you, Dave. Hello, everyone. If you are joining us for this meeting virtually today, instructions for turning on closed captioning are on your screen. If you are joining us in person, we have closed captioning on all the screens here in the Sophie Louise room. There will be an opportunity to speak during the meeting for public comment virtually and in person. We ask that all speakers today speak slowly and clearly. This helps with the accuracy of the closed captioning. If you're on Microsoft Teams, if you'd like to speak when discussion has been open for public comment, we ask that you use the raise hand feature. This is the small hand button. If you are calling in on the phone, you will need to hit *5 to raise your hand. Once called upon, you will need to hit *6 to unmute. If you have any questions, please find me during the meeting and let me know. Thank you. Back to you, Dave.
All right. Thank you, Cheryl. We have two proclamations this week. The first will be read by Commissioner Slotnick. It's Fair Housing Month.
Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, commonly known as the Federal Fair Housing Act, which guarantees fair housing for all residents of the United States, was signed into law in April 1968. And whereas the month of April is nationally recognized as Fair Housing Month and a time to reflect on and reaffirm our national commitment to the right that fair housing opportunity is available to everyone in the United States without regard to race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. And whereas Missoula County and the City of Missoula recognize this legislation endeavors to ensure all our residents are free to purchase, rent, finance, and insure their homes without regard to their sex, marital status, race, creed, religion, color, age, familial status, physical or mental disability, or national origin. And whereas Missoula County and the City of Missoula welcomes this opportunity to celebrate the 55th anniversary of the adoption of the Fair Housing Act and to rededicate our commitment to the principle of fair housing for all by strengthening efforts that address discrimination in our communities, supporting programs that will educate the public concerning their rights to equal housing opportunity, and assuring every person their right to live free of the fear of housing discrimination. Now, therefore, we, the Missoula County Commissioners in the state of Montana and the Mayor of the City of Missoula, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2024 as Fair Housing Month in Missoula, Montana. We encourage all citizens to recognize this celebration for the purpose of improving the quality of life for all residents. Dated this 4th day of April 2024, signed by the Board of County Commissioners and Andrea Davis, the Mayor of the City of Missoula.
Thank you, Commissioner Slotnick. Any comment on that proclamation? Okay, seeing none. Our second proclamation is in recognition of Sexual Assault Action Month.
Missoula County, the City of Missoula, the University of Montana, and associated students of the University of Montana. Whereas Sexual Assault Action Month calls attention to the fact that sexual violence is widespread and has public health and safety implications for the city and county of Missoula and beyond. And whereas rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment harm our community, our friends, and our families, studies show that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 33 men have experienced, completed, or attempted rape. 1 in 9 girls and 1 in 53 boys experience child sexual abuse at the hands of an adult. And 13% of all college students experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, or incapacitation, graduate and undergraduate students. And whereas people of color, especially Native American women, experience violence, unwanted sexual contact, or abuse at a much higher rate than other groups. And whereas statistics tell us how many people are harmed, but talking to a survivor reveals the true impact of this violence, loss of safety and trust, and sometimes even the loss of hope. And whereas the goal of this month is not merely awareness, but prevention of sexual harassment, abuse, and assault. And whereas prevention means stopping sexual violence before it happens by changing norms that allow it to exist in the first place, ranging from attitudes, values, and behaviors to laws, institutions, and social norms. And whereas prevention is everyone's job, and all of us can help create safe environments by intervening to stop behavior, promoting healthy relationships and attitudes, and believing survivors and connecting them to resources. And whereas we strongly support the efforts of national, state, and local sexual assault prevention and response programs in their efforts to create safe, healthy communities. Now, therefore, we, Andrea Davis, the mayor of City of Missoula, Dave Strohmeyer, Juanita Vero, Josh Slotnick, Missoula County Commissioners, Seth Bodnar, President of the University of Montana, and Maggie Bell, President of the Associated Students of the University of Montana, do hereby continue to support the Student Advocacy Resource Center of the University of Montana, the YWCA of Missoula, Project Beacon of All Nations Health Center, First Step at Providence St. Patrick Hospital, and Make Your Move Project of the Missoula City County Health Department, law enforcement agencies, including the Missoula Police Department, Missoula County Sheriff's Office, University of Montana Police Department, the Missoula County Community Justice Department, Special Victims Unit of the Missoula County Attorney's Office and City Attorney's Office, and communities across the country in playing an active role to prevent sexual violence. Along with the United States government and the state of Montana, we hereby proclaim April 2024 as Sexual Assault Action Month in the City of Missoula and Missoula County, signed by Mayor Andrea Davis, President Bodnar, President Maggie Bell, and your county commissioners.
Thank you, Juanita. Is there any comment on this particular item? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I am actually speaking to this particular item, Commissioner Strohmeyer, because I was on campus earlier today and I saw this article that some very gutsy, courageous people have the sad job of both telling and then living and experiencing. So as you guys are using words, I look at actions. I was going to talk about the jurisdictional challenges of trash, homeless trash, the urban camp trash removal event I'm going to be holding on April 8th. But I'm reminded
for the record, if you could state your name, please.
My name is Travis Mateer. My last name is spelled Mateer, and I'm here today with Virgil, spelled Virgil. Okay, and I'm here with Virgil to talk about the jurisdictional challenges of sexual assault reporting and homeless trash. I think there's a common thread here as we create unsafe situations, and I've been bringing attention to unsafe marginal living for many years as the former homeless outreach coordinator of the Paparello Center. I was just out by the river earlier today smoking a joint legally. It was great. It was nice cannabis, and I saw some trash associated with cannabis. You guys are currently in like a little bit of an issue with the state, with cannabis money. Where is it going to go? There's sexual assault money and jurisdictional issues. Where is the sexual assault happening? Where do you report it? We are 10, 12, 15 years away from John Krakauer's book about this community. And I am here to tell you there continues to be a passing of the buck when it comes to sexual assault. There continues to be lived experiences that do not correlate with the ideals that you are trying to set up for our people living in our community, going to school. My little girl is 8 years old now, okay? I told her she wasn't allowed to get any older. She's defying me. I think that's what kids do as they get older. My oldest kid is 15 years old. I'm going to be leaving this here, okay? There's a poem here about, it's about a lot of stuff, but I'm playing a little game with the city and with the county because trash just goes down the river, it goes everywhere. I'm going to be picking up trash on April 8th, and then I'm going to be depositing that trash somewhere. And if you solve the clues, you can figure out where and put a dumpster there. But it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. The trash is going to be deposited on April 11th. That's the day last year that Joey Thompson went missing. Okay, he showed up dead in the river in a different jurisdiction where Sheriff Ryan Funk won't respond to my questions. He just tells me to talk to Missoula, but they won't respond to me either. So I don't want us as a community to treat human beings like trash, sexual assault victims like trash. I think we can do better, and I'm going to help us do better by doing a little cleanup on April 8th. So I ask people to join me. I'm probably over my time, but I know you guys have a difficult job, and I've had a lot of caffeine, and I'm going to go and be positive and productive and see if cannabis stores want to like support my efforts to clean up trash that the state imposes on them through stupid labeling. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you. Is there any other comment on this particular proclamation? All right. So just to give everyone a preview, and I suspect most of you are here for either the Western Materials gravel pit use variance or the Terzo Farm use variance items. But now is the opportunity in the agenda. If you have any other public comment that you'd like to offer, this is the time to do so. And since there are a lot of folks here, I'd ask you to be as succinct as possible. Try to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Hopefully your comments will actually be within the jurisdiction of what Missoula County has some authority over. So we can't speak to NASA or national security issues per se, but there's lots of other things that you might be interested in. And so is that Mr. Everingham in the back who raised his hand? Come on up and share your comments.
Dave Everingham. Lived in Missoula my whole life. I visited the Rock Creek project. The county's doing a great job on shoring up the piers out there. McClay's is coming along great. I hiked Marshall today. It's beautiful. I think you guys deserve a round of applause. Thanks a lot. We have 11 million in the bank in the county. Everybody else is in the red. But Marshall's beautiful, and thanks for all the good work on the bridges.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other public comment on anything that is not on the agenda today? Okay, that was the first and last round of applause we'll receive today. Yeah, okay. Moving on, claims received as of March 19th, 2024 to March 27th, 2024 by the Commissioner's Office total $4,133,632.78. If you're interested in drilling down into what all of those claims actually were that added up to that amount, go to the electronic agenda for today's meeting, and you can click on the link and see the claims over the course of the last, well, actually, it's just not a full month, 19 through the 27th. We have 2 public hearings today. The way these will work is each public hearing will begin with a staff report or a staff report update, since this first item related to a Western Materials gravel pit use variance request is a continuation of a public hearing that's already been open. So we'll begin with staff report. We'll then have an opportunity for the applicant or the applicant's representative to make some comments. We'll be doing things a little bit differently with the first item for the Western Materials gravel pit use variance, in that after the applicant has an opportunity to speak, there is going to be a dedicated opportunity for legal counsel of opponents of the project to say some words, and hopefully that will create a more expeditious meeting so that that individual's legal counsel's statement will cover other folks who might otherwise want to testify on their own. So we're not here too many hours today. We'll begin with the Western Materials gravel pit use variance. And I should also say that one of the peculiarities with this item is that this involves first a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And if the Planning and Zoning Commission, of which the members are assembled here, if they decide to take action today, they will make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, which also are some of the same folks on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then we'll deliberate and take action, perhaps. We're under no time constraints today to take action on this item. I see this mainly as an opportunity to gather additional input from the public and to hear other perspectives that we've not heard previously. So the Planning and Zoning Commission may or may not take action today. It's within their prerogative to do so, and the Board of County Commissioners may or may not take action on that recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. If that's not convoluted enough for all of you, I think we'll just leave it as is. So with that, Jenny Dixon, would you like to provide a staff update?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Commissioners, Planning and Zoning Commission. As Dave said, my name is Jenny Dixon. I'm a planner for planning, development, and sustainability from Missoula County. And there was a hearing on this before the Planning and Zoning Commission on February 22nd. And what I'd like to do is share this. I'm going to use the staff presentation from the last hearing and just hit a few key highlights to bring you back up to speed. And also just to let you know what has happened in the interim since the last hearing. So I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit here. So the variance, this is a use variance request to expand the Western Materials gravel pit at McLean Creek Road and Old Highway 93. I probably have a site map right here. You can see the location of that existing pit, and their proposal is to expand westward onto the adjacent 60-some acres. The variance request is based on several criteria from what we call Part 1 zoning. We kind of broke it into 3 distinct categories, and there are findings in your staff report, draft findings for you, should you decide to adopt those findings, that have given some basis for the staff recommendation for approval of the subject to conditions that address the 3 criteria: that it will not be contrary to the public interest, that there are special conditions that exist that may warrant approval of the variance, and that literal enforcement of the planning and zoning, the decision or the zoning, the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission will result in unnecessary hardship. This is the boundary of the site with some identifying the features of what you would see in a gravel operation. And in the most recent packet of materials for you today, there is a description from Western Materials regarding their different equipment and plants, and I'll let Western Materials address all of that. But what I can tell you is that with expansion, if approved, to go over here, this equipment, asphalt plant, wash plant, concrete plant, would not go in the area of expansion and would not move any further south. So they would remain here or possibly a bit north. I'm going to skip maybe the photos, and I'm going to take you to the mitigation that's proposed for this. Okay, try that again. The current zoning is ZD 40, which allows residential development at 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. This area of expansion, which is west of the current mined area, is zoned with that ZD 40 and allows 1 per 5, and if sold, is likely to probably develop according to that zoning. And then upon reclamation, the expectation is that, as would the area that's currently being mined. With the proposed mitigation by the applicant, should expansion be approved, they have proposed to place a 300-foot buffer separation on the north and south sides to allow for just keeping distance from adjacent properties, and as well as potentially wildlife movement areas. Upon reclamation of this 96 acres, again, if the variance is approved, this is what the development footprint would look like in the future, with up to 40 homes as allowed by zoning on these 40 acres, with the remaining 110 acres in permanently protected open land. We have recommended approval of this variance request subject to conditions. I'm going to hop over to those. I'm just going to hit the highlights of those because we covered these in depth last time. Recommendation for berming, dust control, traffic safety, noise control, hours of operation, location of processing equipment, that 300-foot buffer and wildlife corridor that I mentioned, and the future development plan to protect that 110 acres in permanently preserved open space, and fencing to allow wildlife movement through those buffers. Also, DEQ permit must be retained with the prohibition of mining within 10 feet of groundwater. What I also want to touch upon is the permit history that was brought up at the last hearing. I do believe the applicants have some information that they want to present about that, but I would just mention we had a brief half-page description of kind of a summary of the permit history for this property, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Also a history just based on Missoulian articles relative to the adoption of ZD40 back in the 70s. And then we have also included in the new packet public comment that we have received since the February 22nd hearing. So you got a packet of public comment with 2 petitions and a letter from the Lolo Ranch prepared by Elizabeth Erickson, their attorney. And then this packet contained additional public comment that we received on Missoula County Voice or by email, as well as a 3rd petition, and as well as a letter from the Carlton Protection Trust, representing the opposition, people opposed to this project. I think with that, I will leave it so that there's plenty of time for comment. And if you have questions about any of that, I'm happy to elaborate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny. Does the applicant or applicant's representative want to say anything?
Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Jenny. Jamie Erbacher with WGM Group for the record. Not too much additional information to add today. We did cover most of everything that we needed to last time. As far as the pit history, we are aware of a buy-sell agreement that was entered into in 1970. And as part of that buy-sell agreement, it does note that gravel extraction can occur on this property. So I know that there was some concern that gravel extraction was not part of or was not included on this property prior to the zoning, but we do have that and can submit that per your request if you would like.
Jamie, has that been submitted previously? Do we have?
It has not.
Yeah, please do provide
Okay,
that.
we can do that.
Okay.
John, is there anything else you want to add as far as pit operations? Looking good. Okay, but we are available to respond to any questions as they come up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now I wanted to give an opportunity for legal counsel from the Carlton Protection Trust, Graham Coppice. Come on up and introduce yourself and share with us what you will. And part of the discussion we had prior to this meeting is we want to give 20 minutes to Mr. Coppice to provide any statement or information he has, which again is intended to hopefully take the place of 20 or 30 individual folks coming up and saying exactly the same thing. So, Mr. Coppice.
Thank you all. Graham Coppice. I'm an attorney with Ferguson and Coppice here in Missoula. I specialize in environmental and natural resource law. I'm here with my colleague Taylor Hagan today, who will be splitting our time for our presentation. And we are here on behalf of the neighborhood as a whole, which has coalesced around a new organization called the Carlton Protection Trust. They're here to ask you to deny this variance request to protect their homes and their way of life here in Missoula County. Taylor is going to walk you through what is the zoning district 40, how it was formed, the history of the area, the mine site. We'll walk you through a series of aerial photograph analysis, and then a history of zoning compliance or a lack thereof at this site. I'll then take over and we'll discuss some of the zoning law analysis applicable to this site, in this case. I also want to share with you a lot of what I have learned about the open cut disaster that is currently going on here in Montana as a result of House Bill 599, how that is implicated at this current site, and really how it's left these citizens with very little recourse except for before you all here today. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Taylor, and then I'll be back up. Thank you.
Thank you. Taylor.
All right. Let's see. Can you hear me?
You might need to pull that close.
The top of it and down.
Oh, I see. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, as Graham said, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. As Graham said, I'm going to take you through some of the history of the mining site and the chain of title for the property and some other relevant moments that we find important and relevant to the decision ultimately on whether or not to grant this variance. So if you don't, I don't know, I think you have the PowerPoint. Feel free to get that going. So first off, as Graham said, we are here. Oh, is the formatting is getting a little. Turn it up, please. I'll speak into the mic.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you.
no problem. Okay, so as Graham mentioned, we're here representing the Carlton Protection Trust. They have recently formed, their primary goals here are to promote and protect the residential character of the Carlton neighborhood, and obviously particularly to stop further expansion of the industrial gravel mining operation that is occurring currently in their residential neighborhood. So if you want to go to the next slide. So what is CZD 40, Zoning District 40? I'm sure you guys have already seen this before, but I do want to take our attention. I know it's small here for the public, but to a few important aspects of this resolution. So first, on the second page there, the intent very clearly states that the intent of this residential zoning district was to create low-density residential development. And you're seeing that currently in the southern portion. I'm going to show some maps later that shows where that residential neighborhood has been developed and what it looks like today. So similarly, right below that, you have permitted uses. These include and only include single-family residences, accessory buildings, and parks and playgrounds. Again, no mention of, well, again, let's go down. So under that, you'll see reference to existing non-conforming uses, none of which mention the existence of any kind of industrial operation or gravel pit. I believe there was a home for a youth home on the property, and that became a point of contention during the zoning. That was a pre-existing non-conforming use that was included in the final zoning of this neighborhood. Finally, at the bottom there, you'll see a section related to potential non-conforming uses. And this does very explicitly state that these non-conforming uses shall be limited to their present size and not allowed to expand in any nature or form. And finally, which brings us here before you today, or the applicant, the power to grant any variance to these provisions is vested solely in the Board of County Commissioners. And we find that important because obviously there has been great expansion of this site throughout history, which has not come before the Board of County Commissioners until now. So if you want to go to the next slide. This is just kind of a roadmap of the property, of what we're about to get into in terms of the aerial photography. Of primary relevance in 1970, as the applicant's representative just mentioned, this property passed from the Hearst family to John Felton. And John Felton is known in Missoula as a developer. He eventually went on to subdivide and develop the well-known Mansion Heights neighborhood. When he passed, his obituary talked at length about his work in residential development, also mentioning this property, describing it. John bought 155 acres of land in 1969 with the intention of building a subdivision. And so this property stayed in Felton's possession for about 20 years until it eventually passed in 1991 to Stanley Hendrickson, the individual responsible for starting the mining operation, at least insofar as what we see today. So let's see here. I can't see all of the. And actually, after Hendrickson acquired the property, which Felton had subdivided at that time, again intending to continue residential uses of the property, Mr. Hendrickson likewise subdivided a 20-acre parcel into what we now know as the McLean Ranch minor subdivision, 4 or 5 acre parcels. And subsequent to that, Mr. Hendrickson began to develop that mining operation, which he passed on to the applicant, Western Materials, between 2015 and 2019. That residential portion was sold to another individual or a family. And again, just to review some of the uses at that time, it has primarily been used for residential purposes. The property in question, particularly from 1970 to 1991, was used for agricultural purposes. So it was hayed. You can see the irrigation on the property. There is arguably 1 small acre or so of some digging going on, but certainly not any kind of commercial operation that we see today or that we see occurring starting in around 2001 to 2005 and onward. So if you want to go to our next slide, we'll get into some of these aerials. This is the oldest one we can get our hands on, 1955. You see to the south, there is no residential neighborhood there at the time. It is, hayed, it's fields, it's irrigated. There is some ground disturbance in the southeast corner there, but again, nothing to indicate any kind of commercial operation or roads necessarily going out to it. You do start to see to the right of, I believe that's Old Highway 93, you can see the beginning of the Dennis Washington pit, which you'll see in the later aerials began to be developed in the 60s, I believe. So if you want to go to the next slide, you see pretty much the same thing, 1966. This is still owned by the Hearsts at the time. They're using it for agricultural purposes. Likewise, you can begin to see some residential neighborhood development to the south there in where the location of the current neighborhood today. Again, that pit or, mound is still there. Not anything like what we know it as today. So if you want to go to the next slide, unfortunately we can't, or just that next one there. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we haven't been able to obtain any aerials from 1970, but that said, if you switch back and forth between 1966 and 1982, it's pretty clear that there hasn't been much going on the property. It looks ultimately the same in that 20-year period of time. If anything, that pit is now gone. What would have conceivably been a minor, very small gravel pit, even for personal use, is now no longer there. You can see Dennis Washington's pit has grown substantially at this time, and likewise the neighborhood has expanded considerably. Otherwise, the property continues to be used for agricultural purposes, which likewise aligns with the subsequent permit applications submitted by Mr. Hendrickson in the 90s. So if you want to go to the next slide, it's also in the 80s. Again, green, no commercial mining operation occurring. Mr. Washington's pit is still there, and the neighborhood looks basically the same. So if you want to keep going, and again, we've had zoning occurring in this time period. So again, we don't have the aerial footage for it, but between 1966 and that 1982 aerial, that zoning was enacted. Okay, so 1995, this is subsequent to Mr. Hendrickson obtaining the property, obtaining a zoning compliance permit from the county, and likewise obtaining the first mining permit on record for this property in 1993. That permit authorized Mr. Hendrickson to a 5-acre portion of property and allowed him to mine or bonded 3.5 acres of that 5 acres. So if you actually take the aerial or the area of that pit, it is about 3.5 acres at this point in time. So again, primarily the property is still in use as an agricultural potential future residential development. But you do not see the type of industrial mining operation that we are currently seeing today. So if you want to go to the next slide, 2005, this is looking more like what we know it as today, and it is substantially larger. At this time, Mr. Hendrickson was actually operating unpermitted by the DEQ. His permit had expired in 2000. He reapplied for the permit around 2001. Allegedly, that paperwork was lost by the DEQ, but he continued to expand at this point now to about a 72-acre portion of property, taking over that whole eastern half of that section there. Well, not section, but that piece of property. Again, you see the residential development there. It maintains its residential character, but this mining operation is inching closer and closer and obviously growing growing considerably at this point in time. So this next slide is our last aerial. It essentially shows the pit as it looks today, 72 acres. At this point in time, Mr. Hendrickson had been retroactively given or issued a permit for this site. So he operated unpermitted on this site, expanding the use from about at least 2000 to 2009 when he was issued his permit. And so the next thing I want to take us through are just a few documents related to the initial permitting that Mr. Hendrickson acquired. So this is a plan of operation. Again, I apologize, it's so small. But the primary thing I want to draw our attention to here is the second point. And in that section, he lists the existing uses of the property. And I can't read it off of that, but he lists it as used for grazing and irrigated grain farming when he initially applied for this permit in 1993. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the zoning compliance form that Mr. Hendrickson obtained from the county, and that was required when he went to obtain his initial mining permit in 1993. And the primary thing I want us to be looking at is the attestation. So at the very end there, Mr. Hendrickson attests that this property is not located within an area zoned residential. This was, again, we would argue a non-conforming use. At the time, I would say likely should have been issued or gone under review for a variance request at this point in time. Instead, he represented that he was in compliance, that this area was not zoned, and therefore was issued this zoning compliance form, which he later then used to obtain the 1993 mining permit. This last slide, or the next slide, is an opinion letter recommendation from the Missoula County Deputy Attorney in 2008 when it was realized that Mr. Hendrickson was operating and expanding this mine without a legitimate permit from the DEQ. The letter acknowledges that he is operating unpermitted. It sort of retroactively says at this point the damage has been done. But the most important part of this letter from our perspective is the end of it, in which the deputy county attorney observes that, or recommends rather, that the zoning compliance permit be granted, but with the provision that the permit, while allowing gravel extraction, is limited by the permit period and will lapse at the end of that period. And I believe the permit period at the time was intended to lapse in 2020. And again, just further evidence that the whole goal, even though this was retroactively permitted, the goal has been that it lapse eventually, and sooner than later. And again, to restore the property to the residential nature that it was intended for and initially zoned by the community to be. This was, again, prior to the 2009 permit being issued, but it was relevant in Mr. Hendrickson being able to obtain that 2009 permit insofar as this was his, the recommendation that he be permitted in compliance with the zoning at the time. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just wrap up here. Again, the history, it's pretty clear what was happening on the property when you look at the aerials. And reviewing the documents, we are at this point left with, I would say, 3 important questions. The first being whether the legal use actually did exist at the time of the adoption of the zoning ordinance, or the resolution ZD40. 1976, Mr. Felton, again, was intending the property to be subdivided. The Missoulian articles referenced in the packet actually indicate that he was wanting to use the property as a mobile home park, which is why he expressed some disagreement in having his property included. The property at the time and still was intended to be low density residential, and he wanted it to be higher density, at least on the portion of the property that he owned. At no point in time in 1976, when he was a part of these commission meetings, did he represent or request that this be removed from the zone in order to operate a gravel mine or pit. The discussion of a gravel mine or pit did not occur until 1991 or 1993 when Mr. Hendrickson obtained the property. So secondly, I think it's important to consider whether the use was abandoned, even if we do, even if you accept that the use was in existence in 1976, the aerials from 1980, the early 1980s into mid 1980 very clearly show periods of non-use. And currently, and at the time, if you are not using your non-conforming use for 180 days, that non-conforming use is lapsed. So I think it's pretty clear that he also likely abandoned that use, Mr. Felton, prior to selling the property to Mr. Hendrickson in 1991. And finally, whether it was ever the intent of the original user, Felton, at the time of the adoption of the zoning in 1976, to develop a large-scale gravel mining operation. All records from this time period seem to indicate no, that he wanted to place a mobile home park there at best, or otherwise develop the property as a subdivision. And so those are the thoughts I'll leave you with, and I will turn it over to Graham.
Thank you, Taylor. And Graham, you're at about 20 minutes already, so I will give you a little bit more time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We will be quick. And like you said, this is on behalf of a large number of people that are not commenting so that we can present to you all. And we do appreciate it. So if we could pull our PowerPoint back up, and we'll just go to the next slide. And that entire history is relevant. Why? Because of zoning law that exists. And so we want to look at an analysis of the zoning law based on that history that we just saw, because it has implications for what we're doing today. So what is an existing non-conforming use? Well, Black's Law Dictionary says it's a land use that is in use at the time, that is impermissible at the time that a zoning district is created. Okay, and that applies both in nature and in scope. So it's important for us to think about, as we look through those aerial images and the history that we just talked about, what was the scope of any use and the nature of that use that existed at the time that the zoning law was created. Well, photographs are not subject to opinion. They are factual representations of something that happened. This is not somebody's recollection or attestation. It is a fact of record that we can establish what is viewed in a photograph or is not. Those photographs unequivocally identify that, if anything, there was less than 2-3 acres that was being mined at the time. And that's going to be based off of somebody saying that there was some disturbed part of that ground. We could argue about whether that's true or not true, but the fact is that it was a very, very, very small parcel of land that was identified on those photographs as being disturbed. The vast majority of the area that is currently identified as a non-conforming use was not being used in that way. The nature was not there. It was used as an irrigated field, and that is undisputed in the record before you. So we can go to the next slide. So what we've just established is that there is no pre-existing non-conforming use for a large-scale industrial gravel mine covering 80 acres that exists there today. So abandonment then also becomes important, as Ms. Hagan described, because there was a period of time also identified in the factual record where that use ceased to exist. And we can see that by looking at the photographs. The gravel disturbance that arguably was there is then covered back over for a period of time. And that has to be based on those photographs for at least 2 years, which more than meets the 180-day definition required for an abandonment. We can go to the next slide. So what about expansion of a non-conforming use? Well, Missoula County has recognized that vested interest passed with ownership. So where you have an existing non-conforming use that passes through the chain of title, that continues to the successor in interest. However, the property owner may not expand that. And why is that? Well, because that's an increased burden on an established protected area under the zoning law. And so, for example, and I'm not sure why these slides got cut off. Hopefully they're not for you all, but Missoula County has looked at an idea of a business, restaurant business, in which they said, if you pass this business, this non-conforming business, to a successor in interest, that's fine. You can continue to operate in that way, but you can't add additional tables and you can't add additional seating area and basically expand the scope of what the burden is on the neighborhood, because in recognition that this is non-conforming by definition with what the citizens and that the government here has enacted for this area. You can go to the next slide. So again, this is because there's a basic premise in zoning law, which is that the presumption that zoning ordinances are to be strictly construed in favor of enforcement. These are fundamental issues, which mean that when we go through the process of zoning, we do that for a reason. That citizens initiate Part 1 zoning for a reason, governments initiate Part 2 zoning for a reason, and that's for sound growth policy. This county commission is well aware of that. And to grant a variance from that is to be the exception, not the rule, of course. And it's supposed to be based on a series of good reasons, and that's going to be a sort of equitable balancing of the interest between those seeking non-conforming uses and those seeking to protect the conforming use. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So Missoula County has regulations on this, as you guys are all aware. The zoning regulations establish unequivocally that a proposed variance will not authorize a use that is not already authorized in the district. That's a double negative, which essentially means that you can't authorize a non-conforming use if basically the zoning district allows for that somewhere else. If there are special conditions that exist at the site that are unique to the property, which surely I know the applicant has explained to you that there are here. Obviously, we disagree, and I'll share some more on that later. But granting the variance also has to be not injurious to the neighborhood, and that's a public interest component, and that's exactly the opposite of what is happening here. Next, please. And this is the inverse or the reverse way of saying just that. It must not be contrary to the public interest. Literal enforcement must not have resulted as unnecessary hardship, and that the spirits of the ordinance must be observed and substantial justice done. Next. Okay, so at this site, we have a residentially zoned area where there was no non-conforming use that existed at the time that the zoning district was established, or at least a very small one if we want to entertain that concept. So there is bad precedent that could be established here, or that will be established here, if we essentially allow this non-conforming use to not only have grown over the length of time that it was never supposed to have grown, but also now to give the stamp of approval of this commission on doubling it. And that is where the context of this history comes in from this site. I think we have to think about the fact that we have a community here of individuals and folks who have investment-backed expectations in the property which they purchased. They know they purchased zoned property. They moved their families there because they know they have zoned properties. And there is no good reason to allow this to continue to grow from what has been illegal from the beginning. And I think that's important for us all to recognize, that there has been a burden that's been imposed on these neighbors since the time that this thing became illegal in the first place. In 1993, when we got the first mining permit that was associated at this site, the applicant conveyed specifically to DEQ as an outright falsehood that this conformed with the zoning for this neighborhood. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but there was a certification that was made to the Department of Environmental Quality that this area either wasn't zoned or that it complied with the zoning, and that is just out and out false. And so there is factual inaccuracy which underlies the entire history of this site. And that then was recognized by the Missoula County Attorney's Office in 2009 when it issued what essentially is an advisory opinion about this site, where they said, this thing needs to die, but there are some equitable considerations as far as it's been in existence for a period of time. Nobody has said anything about it thus far. And so why don't we just let it die naturally on its own when this permit expires in 2020? And that's the opposite of what we're here talking about today. We're not talking about the death of this thing. We're talking about the growth of it. And so we're talking about an increased burden on a neighborhood of residences, their children and their family, all who are enduring pollution that's associated with this site. And this isn't an activity like a restaurant that we looked at in some of the other examples, where there is no harm to neighbors that result from the activity. This isn't an issue of just merely traffic and noise. We're talking about water pollution and air pollution. And in the information that we've sent to you, and in my fight with the state of Montana over the last year over the Open Cut Mining Act, I have learned a lot that I want to share with you all about the negative impacts of these projects. If we look at any of the environmental assessments that are conducted by Montana DEQ in association with these projects, they all identify hydrocarbon pollution that is either from fuel spills, that are from chemicals that are involved in the asphalt plant making process. Those fumes are then wafting in the air and going into children's lungs and neighbors. And then we have dust that is ubiquitously a problem with these sites as well. And that is why the legislature amended the open cut mining law to make it easier for companies to get these permits, because under the governor's red tape initiative, they want to cut government regulation to make it easier for companies to increase their profit margin. And that is what this is. it's a margin increase issue. And that's because these sites,
For any callers online or on the phone, please mute yourself.
Oh,
sorry.
no problem. And I know I'm going over my time.
No,
So
no, continue.
these sites really are ubiquitous. DEQ has a GIS mapping site, which I encourage you all to go look at. You can look at all of the pending and currently existing mining sites. Almost every single one of the cases that I'm now involved in, these companies own additional mine sites within several miles of the new one that they're applying for. There simply is no supply side issue that exists here. We're not running out of gravel. This is about increasing profit margin for the company. And there is no guarantee that that profit margin is being passed on to homeowners that are building new sites. Of course, we need gravel for our roads and our bridges and our homes. That's not at issue. But what is a narrative that's being pushed by the gravel mining industry that I can see, that is that we need this to be as cheap as possible. Why? Well, they say that it's because they're going to pass that on to consumers in cheaper homes and cheaper products, but that's not what the financials show. And if we're going to use an economic argument to convince this commission to advance a variance from a residential neighborhood, I suggest that they should be able to put forward some evidence to you that that economic gain is going to be passed on to the end consumer, the home buyer or the citizen, not into the company's pocketbook. And that's exactly what we see. That data is in the memorandum that my office sent to you. We looked at recent financials from publicly traded companies here in Missoula County, that's Knife River, among others. And those profits are going straight into the shareholders' pockets, which is fine. That's what corporations are designed to do. But that is not what zoning is designed to do. And really, the last thing that I want to leave you with here is that the sponsor of House Bill 599, which eviscerated all environmental protection from the Open Cut Mining Act, basically in response to public outcry about the proliferation of these sites, has said that zoning is the tool that exists to stop these mines. The Open Cut Mining Act no longer gives DEQ discretion to regulate things like public health, water quality impacts, traffic, noise, dust, those concerns. I'm litigating these cases now in Arley, in Clearwater Junction, also in Missoula County, in Gallatin County, in Madison County, across the state. And I am here to tell you that Montana DEQ is rubber stamping these permits left and right. They're being issued within 10 days of the time that they're being submitted by the applicants, and there is no environmental oversight that's happening. And so what is the solution for people to stop these things from happening in their own neighborhood and next to their homes? And as you can see there on the screen, the quote from the bill's sponsor is that zoning is the fix. Zoning is the only tool that exists for citizens to have an effect on the outcome of these mining projects next to their home. If we go, my clients litigating these issues in district court, at the Montana Supreme Court, and before the Board of Environmental Review, is a bottomless pit of administrative law that does not yield results for the citizens. It's unfortunate, but this is the first group of people that I have represented that have an opportunity to utilize zoning as a tool to say, this is not what we want for our neighborhood, and this is not what we want for our families. And that's what my clients are asking you to do here today, is to protect their interest in their home and their community, to stop the expansion of what has been an illegal site from the beginning, from the get-go, to not put the commission's stamp of approval on something that should have been rejected long ago. And while we can't correct the wrong today of 40 years of history of illegal activity at this site, what we can do is not stop it from doubling in size going forward. And with that, we respectfully request that you deny this variance request, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kappas. So for those who have been waiting patiently online or on the phone, and we'll come back to the room here if there's any additional public comment, I'd like to give folks online using Microsoft Teams or on the phone an opportunity to comment. So please use the raise hand function and we'll call on you in the order in which you raise your hand, or unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Anyone online or on the phone? Okay.
Hello?
Yes, is this a Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, speaking.
Yeah, go ahead if you would like to make a public comment.
Yeah, just simply the alleged 1970 buy-sell agreement is not a mandate. It's only an agreement between a seller and a buyer. It does not authorize non-conforming industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Anyone else online or on the phone? Okay, coming back here to the courthouse in the Sophie Moise room. Is there anyone who would like to offer public comment? Come on up and folks, please be as succinct as possible and begin by stating your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Sarah Johnson. Let me just tell you a little about who I am. So I am a nurse by background. I've been in the healthcare industry for 21 years. It's a long time. I've been a farmer in organic farming for about 15. And I currently lead the award-winning, nationally recognized environmental stewardship program at a nearby local hospital. So health and people's health is kind of my bread and butter. Looking at how human health intersects with environmental health is what I've been doing for a very long time. And what I've learned in that, I'm also part of the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. You've already heard from me, so you might have already heard some of this. But what I've done with that organization is look at how industry impacts the health of the communities that live nearby. And what we see and what has been stated here today is that air quality, people that live next to industry have poorer health outcomes. They have more respiratory illnesses, more cardiovascular illness, more psychological health issues. If their water quality is degraded, there's that issue as well. And so when you're considering this and you're considering unnecessary hardship in the zoning, the unnecessary hardship will come, and it will come like over time. My children today, I have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and the unnecessary harm will build up over their lifetime as they're continue to be exposed to the effects of this mining operation. It's very hard for me to speak when I talk about my children and my neighbors' children and what might happen to them if this pit is expanded. They will grow up next to it half a mile away with poor air quality and a potential for our water source to be polluted. And what will they do about our water source if they pollute it? That cannot be fixed easily. And unnecessary hardship on people if their water source is polluted, or if they have higher incidences of asthma, if their child has to go to the emergency room in the middle of the night because suddenly we have a wildfire and our air quality is poor anyway, and you have particulates that you can't see, but they're being exposed. And I heard that Western Materials wants to use water to help mitigate that. Water is a very valuable resource. And I know when I purchased my farm, I took a very long time searching for land with water rights because water is such a scarce resource. And I am only able to use a certain amount on my property. And with this, they don't have a certain limit to how much water they can use. And if they're using our water that we all share, and they're using it to mitigate the dust that they're causing, and they're using copious amounts of it, that, in my opinion, is causing unnecessary hardship when Montana is facing hotter, drier summers, increased periods of drought. We're having lower snowpacks, or our aquifer has a potential for less refill. It's concerning to me, and I think that there's unnecessary hardship that cannot be mitigated if you vote yes on this variance. So I strongly oppose it as a healthcare professional, as a mother, as a farmer, as a community member, not just for my health, but for the health of those that are most vulnerable around me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share their thoughts? Come on up.
Hi, Commissioners. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Dabrowski, and I'm a neighbor. And I agree with everything Mr. Kopp said. I really appreciate that presentation. And when we were here on February 22nd, there was a group that went just before us of neighbors, and your answer to them to protect against subdivision was zoning. That is what our legs that we have to stand on. And I really hope that you guys hear that our zoning is what we have to fight this fight. And if that is the answer for other citizens, we hope that it is our answer too. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all.
Thank you. Additional public comment. Anyone else like to share their thoughts? Going once, going twice. Oh, yes, we have a taker. Come on up.
I'm Luis Arches, and I live in the neighborhood. I think it was a great presentation. I think it laid out a lot of things that you need to think about. I think the most damning thing is that this gravel pit was put in illegally by the original owner of the gravel pit, that he out and out lied by saying that it was outside of the zoning district that it was in. And that in itself, I think, should disqualify any expansion. And the other thing is, as part of their variance request, one of the things that they want to do is be able to do night operations. It said, I believe in there, that they want to have the ability to run night operations at the gravel pit, which is basically going to affect all of our sleep. Because if you've ever lived next to a gravel pit, you'll know that they're not exactly a quiet enterprise. So I would urge you to vote against the variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open it up for some discussion and questions on the part of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Josh.
Thanks. So I had two, so.
Go for it.
So the first one for Jenny, and this, if you could explain to all of us, everyone here, the difference between part 1 and part 2 zoning and how a variance fits in with those two types of zoning.
You bet.
Essentially answering Dabrowski's question of zone yourself and the difference.
This is zoned, it's part 1 zoning. Yeah. Explain the difference between part 1 and part 2 and how a variance plays in.
Okay. So the zoning that applies to this property, it falls under a section of law that is the kind of a predecessor to part 2 that was utilized quite a bit back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, somewhat in the 80s and 90s, and then really it is not used often at all. And it's a very brief, ambiguous description of how you create a development pattern if there is a majority of the landowners that want to create zoning, and often was written by those folks. And so not only is a section of law related to part 1 zoning ambiguous, but then often the zoning district has very few regulations to give guidance. The section of law, part 1, that talks about variances, and we've gone through that criteria, those 3 points of the criteria, does not eliminate the opportunity for use variance, which is the case here, that they can request a use variance. Part 2 zoning, where variances do not come to this body, they go to the County Board of Adjustment, uses different review criteria and does not allow use variance. So when people come to us and ask, we want to zone, or when you suggest we think you should zone, we're talking about modern part 2 zoning because of the extreme difficulty of implementation of part 1 zoning. That those are the primary differences, I guess, in the variance world.
Thanks. Next question for Mr. Kopis, please. First, thanks a lot for a clear and well-ordered presentation. Appreciate that. You mentioned a permit that was supposed to die at 2020. Can you revisit that? I'm worried I'm not using the right language. Describe what it was, who did it, et cetera.
Yeah, so that was based on the 2009 Missoula Deputy County Attorney's memorandum that was in the slideshow. And what it based, that was my terminology, but that is the opinion that exists in that county attorney's advisory opinion, where it says essentially There's a latches issue here, which is an equitable doctrine. that-
Batches? I'm sorry, I don't know
Yeah,
what that is.
sorry. Basically, there's a recognition that the site had been existing and operating, which at that time in 2009, nobody disputes that that was occurring. And so what they basically were saying is, well, we have a non-conforming use here. The review of the history of this site shows that it was been beset with abnormalities, for lack of a better term, from its inception. But the permit that exists for the mining license, the underlying mining permit from Montana DEQ, was set to expire in 2020. And so the county attorney says, well, based on its existing use, nobody's complained about it thus far. Let's just let this thing die and then it'll go away. The non-conforming use will cease to exist and it will, in essence, deal with itself. And that could have happened, but that's not what happened. And we're here today because not only is the non-conforming use going to continue, but it is being proposed to double in size.
So in 2020, did whoever was operating the pit apply for a new permit?
Correct.
And what year was it? We said 2009. I'm sorry if I'm getting these.
Yeah, the Missoula County Attorney's opinion was in 2009. And my
Okay.
understanding of the history of that document, which is not entirely clear, is that, so as Ms. Hagan explained, in 2001 or in 2000, the original underlying DEQ mining permit ended. And so that was what basically created a period of time in which there was no license associated with this site. And I guess the record shows that, or there is mention in the record that they applied for it, but DEQ lost it. That's literally what it seems like happened. Either way, there wasn't a permit on site for a period of time. Somehow that came to the county attorney's desk in 2009. My guess is that that's because there was this recognition that there was no permit for the site. So when you ask for a mining permit for DEQ, from DEQ, you have to check a box or fill out a form that says this site, I certify that this site complies with local zoning. And so in order to get that, you need a statement from a county official, which is what we saw in the original 1993 permit application as well. And so at that time, my guess is what they were trying to clean the record up on this thing, get a new mining permit in site from the period of time that it was lost. And they needed a statement from Missoula County that this complied with the zoning. And at that time, the county attorney looked at it and said, this does not comply. This is screwed up. This should not have happened this way, but it did. And out of a sense of equity, which is basically equitable consideration for the fact that something has been occurring for a period of time and that there is some expectation that continues with use over time, that we should just let this continue until it dies on its own in 2020.
Okay, thank you.
And that's really the problem, is that these sites, you can continue to up them, you can continue to apply. And so while before the commission here is a variance request that is connected to an underlying mining site, which would continue for decades into the future, that could be continued and continued, and it could be expanded and expanded. And every time we actually allow this thing to grow a little more and continue for longer, it becomes harder to stop it in the future.
And do we
Yeah,
have,
go ahead.
do we have the document, the references that end date of 2020? Do we have that permit? It's not in our packet, is it?
Could you come on up to the microphone,
Sorry,
please?
Taylor.
I can probably send it to you guys.
Could you repeat that again?
I said I can probably send you a copy, but really what happened is that in 2009, they were issued a permit, the second permit, 2681, I believe. Subsequently, they applied for, I believe currently they're on Amendment 4. And each time they apply for an amendment, they change the site location or the amount, and also potentially the period of time at which reclamation shall occur. And so last, and my understanding is that currently, or at least under 2681 Amendment 4, that reclamation date is now in 2045. But again, what to Mr. Kopas's point, the DEQ is going to do something separate than what Missoula County is going to do. So the DEQ is going to continue to approve these amendments essentially indefinitely. So the 2008 or 9 letter that initially led to the 2009 permitting stated at that time that we should let this thing die when the permit, already provides it should die. And I can confirm that whether that's 2020, I'm pulling that from my memory right now. But yeah, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
That letter in 2009 acknowledged that whoever put in for the permit had said that this complies with zoning when it actually didn't.
Yes.
So in 2020, what happened? Because the zoning hadn't changed, the activity hadn't changed. So imagine the activity is still not in compliance with the zoning, and someone applied for a new permit in 2020?
I believe they've been in conversation with you now, or at least for the last few years, and then ultimately decided that another zoning compliance permit was not going to meet the criteria.
So they were operating without a permit after 2020?
No, because, I don't know the zoning compliance permit, whether or not that expired ever. It's just that when they went to expand, I guess I have to
I
go
wasn't
back and
talking
look,
about
'cause
zoning
the days
compliance.
or the years are.
I wasn't talking about zoning compliance. If I understand it right, I totally could have it
Yeah.
wrong. You guys are attorneys,
No, go ahead.
obviously not.
It's
So
a complicated.
It sounds like
pattern.
a permit from the DEQ was applied for in 2009.
Yes, or issued.
Issued, and whoever had applied for this permit had said, yes, it complies with zoning, when actuality it didn't.
Well, so
And then the county attorney said, you know what, we get it. We're just going to let this thing die in 2020.
So
in 2020, did someone apply for a new permit? Because here we are 4 years later.
Yeah, so in 2020, I believe they're still operating under the old permits because the reclamation date had already been amended to 2045 by that point. Now they're asking, and I believe they've already gotten or are working towards getting this now amended for expansion with the DEQ. But part of that is that they want to expand into these additional 60 acres.
So you don't need a new permit as long as you haven't hit the reclamation date?
Or aren't changing the use. And and again, that's what Mr. Kopis is saying, is that without county intervention, either, revoking that permit or otherwise not granting a further variance of the permit. Because again, this has never been before a board for a variance review. This has received a zoning compliance permit at each stage that it's been allowed to continue. And so in 2008, what happened, my understanding, again, the fact pattern is very convoluted. And so we're still working to piece apart how exactly we even got to this point. But to the best of my understanding, what happened is that in 2008, it became clear that they had been operating without a permit since at least 2001 when they applied for 2861 or for that initial permit to expand the operation to 72 acres. At that point in time, they sought, or the county, the Office of Planning and Grants sought an opinion from the county attorney on whether or not to grant or to permit the zoning compliance form or permit to allow Mr. Hendrickson to obtain the DEQ permit to expand the operation, which he subsequently did get in 2009. So in 2008, the county attorney essentially just offered an opinion saying the zoning appears to preclude this activity. That said, it's been ongoing now for however many years that out of equity of the parties, we're going to and likewise, for whatever reason, the DEQ was also operating as though it were permitted. And I think my understanding is that that's because he had posted a bond for those 72 acres, but the permit, for whatever reason, was never actually issued. So the DEQ treated it as a permitted mine, even though there was no permit. And in that period of time, then it became, when they were reviewing the bonded acreage for mining, they realized that, oh, this property actually never got a permit, went back to Mr. Hendrickson and said, you need to get a permit for this property. He then applied for a zoning compliance permit from the Office of Planning and Grants, at which time they sought the county attorney's opinion on whether or not this use was actually in compliance. So at that time, the county attorney issued his opinion that no, it's not in compliance with the zoning, but out of equity, and because the DEQ seems to be retroactively granting this permit, we're going to say this is the last time you get a zoning compliance permit. And part of that also was to issue for the future a zoning compliance permit for the reclamation of the property as well. So for the filling in of that pit.
Thank you.
Sorry. It's convoluted.
Just to follow on the question, so John Hart,
And that's why I said.
Missoula County Deputy County Attorney.
I didn't write that letter though.
Okay. So have there been points recognizing that there's a decades-long history that has gotten us to where we are today? Were there points where a decision threshold should have been here before the Board of County Commissioners? A decision should have been before the Board of County Commissioners, and it was not. And is that even germane today?
I can't say that definitively that there should have been a public process that was overlooked or skipped or sidestepped in the past. What I can say is that, it might have been a good idea at some point in time in the past to have had some kind of a public hearing about the mining permits that were applied for in the past. But I can't say, yes, based on this statute, this is what you should have happened. That's not helpful, but that's about as much help as I can be.
Sure. In just a moment, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I
So
don't
John,
need any help.
should something have happened in 2020 that didn't? Should some action should have been taken? This thing's going to die in 2020. What should have happened then?
I don't know. I would like to hear, I think that the applicant needs to answer some of these questions. I wasn't part of that application process. They have had a permit to mine on 72 acres, since around 2009. But I mean, we heard Ms. Hagan talk about this. They might be on their 4th amendment now. I don't know how these amendments work. I'm not an expert on open cut mining or Title 85, but the applicant could certainly tell us at this meeting or a subsequent meeting, what has happened since they have owned the mine.
I'm wondering if on that amendment, did they check the box that said, yes, this is in compliance or not with the zoning? I don't know.
Well, we heard that there was a 1993 attestation that the property was not zoned residential, and I'm not sure what has transpired since then. Jenny.
Thank you. When the county zoning office became aware in 2008 that a permit had been sitting on the desk at DEQ for 6.5 years, there was a lot of angst, and I have an analysis written up here where it took us about 1.5 years to kind of come to some conclusions, which ultimately was the result of that Mike Sahasted letter from the county attorney's office. But the summary was the gravel pit has received zoning compliance twice before, once in 1993, where it was acknowledged as a non-conforming use based on that small amount of activity. And what we got was then in 1999, a handwritten note from our county attorney's office that says, I have reviewed the zoning compliance permit for the gravel extraction for JTL, which was who was doing it in 99. And they are a legal non-conforming use that was required to be newly permitted under the change in the law. Please sign the zoning compliance permit. So that was in 99. So twice the planning department was encouraged by the county attorney's office in their, with their knowledge of law and mining law, and based on zoning law, that it was a legal non-conforming use, that it was in fact zoning compliant. Now, whether that's in fact true and the cases made here are compelling. By the time it came to us again for the third time, 6.5 years later, after they submitted to DEQ for their expansion to 72 acres, that's when we were told, I recommend you issue the permit for that period up until, and I thought it was 2045, but I guess it could be 2020. And just a sec. When we issue zoning compliance, it doesn't expire. I mean, like when we issued zoning compliance in 2009, it was to do that use could continue until whenever. The expiration is on the DEQ side of things. And so if there's a 2020 expiration and then it was extended to 2045, which I think it was. So nothing happened in 2020 that you need to worry that other than maybe from the DEQ side of things.
Yeah, and I guess just to be clear that Mr. Hested's letter says that it will lapse at the end of that period, is limited by the permit period and will lapse at the end of that period. And he is talking about the DEQ permit there. So he's basically saying when the mining permit for this thing dies, this issue goes away and we should just let that happen. So it does seem like maybe he was talking about 2045 at that point of time, but I think what we're really talking about is a cascade of errors that occurred maybe just out of simple mistake, which happened starting back in 1993. That mistake then is perpetuated by the fact that it's a permanent mistake, is what we just heard, that the zoning noncompliance then essentially is self-fulfilling forever and ever. And it was all based on a misstatement of truth at the outset. And so essentially we have a situation here that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of a misstatement of fact and truth that is then applied incorrectly, that then is perpetuated for a 3-decade period of time, and now is being applied as the rationale to double in size something that never should have existed in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Koppas. I'd like to get to Representative Western Materials.
Thank you. My name is Mike Smith. I'm with WGM and I represent Western Materials in this. And I just was hoping to provide some clarity. Commissioner Zlotnick had noted that a lot of these issues were DEQ issues. My job is to go through the permitting process with DEQ, so I'm very, very familiar with how they operate. One thing that I would like to point out from the DEQ's point of view, there's a lot of discussion about the permit expiring and ending at a certain date. The way that the DEQ permits these permits, you cannot put on your permit application, I want this permit to last forever. Clearly, that wouldn't be a good choice for keeping things in compliance. What they do is they make you put a date on it, and they say, tell me why, this sounds like a good time. And usually it's like, we can't tell what's going to happen with the industry, with building needs forever, but we see a need for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And the plan by the DEQ, by making them put a date on the end, requires that applicant or operator to go back when that date is closed and ask to be continued. So while it's called, and on the application itself, and to this day, and even on the old ones, it says estimated date of reclamation. When do you think you might be done? So we say, well, we think we're going to be done now, but it is typical and very common practice, almost to a T, that unless these pits are single use, which you might find in the middle of the state for an extension of a highway, once that highway is done, they're not going to have any more need there. So then those pits will close. A pit where development continues and there's a continuing need and there's continuing requirements to have the gravel, these pits are often extended. And by putting that date on there, the DEQ then has control over what you do. It allows them, most importantly to them, to increase the bond, because bond prices always go up. So they want to make sure that as the DEQ, they have control. If the operator walks away, they have enough money in their bond to reclaim that pit. So the expiration date in this pit, in the one that was granted in 2015, I think, or 2014, when that was set at 2045. The plan has always been with this pit and with many others like it. When that date gets close, we will reevaluate if there's a continued need, if there's a continued viability, and if we need to extend that date for the DEQ. And if you have any questions, I can answer.
Yeah, I have some questions that might take us in a slightly different direction, but go ahead.
So what is the date then? 2020 or 2045 that you're referencing?
Well, I believe in Stan Hendrickson's original one in 2009, I think he identified 2020. When it was renewed in, I believe, 2014 or 15, that date was then identified as 2045. So that, I don't think anyone argues that that permit was certainly accepted and treated as valid. The one that says 2045 now, the one that we are trying to expand. So currently the date of planned of estimated reclamation finishing is 2045.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So you said 2014, you thought there was an amendment, an extension applied for?
Yes.
So in that application, is there a box that gets checked that says we're in compliance with zoning?
We had the zone, as Jeannie pointed out, the zoning compliance certificate from the previous permit, that was the one that Michael
Haystead.
Yes, him. Signed. Once you have that, you don't have to get it every other time, another time. So we said it was in this permit. We're now transferring it to this permit. We don't request it again. If it was compliant with zoning, then it was compliant with zoning now, as Jenny pointed out.
Okay, I've got a couple other questions. You may or may not be the right person from Western Materials to answer this, but
I'll do my best.
What is the unnecessary hardship that literal enforcement of the zoning would create?
I am definitely not the person to answer that question. Alan, are you on the call here? Alan McCormick is our legal counsel. I think he was on.
Alan, are you out there? I see him.
I am.
Okay, Mr. McCormick, what is the unnecessary hardship that brings us here today to contemplate this variance request?
Well, largely the unnecessary hardship is that gravel exists where gravel exists. And it's not possible to continue to seek gravel when gravel is being built upon. And so the resource exists there, the gravel exists there, and the only thing that's preventing its extraction, given that the permitting has been available and is certainly likely to continue, and by permitting I mean the DEQ, is that the only thing that's preventing it from occurring is the zoning restrictions. And so the zoning are creating a hardship. And you can liken it to classic hardship cases. You've got a lot that's 150 feet wide, but the zoning has a 200-foot setback or something like that. Obviously, a strict interpretation of it means you can't use your lot because the setback is eliminating all use of it. In this instance, the gravel resource that is being taken here is inaccessible because of the restriction against the further extraction of gravel. So variances exist specifically to prevent situations like this where you can demonstrate that there's a hardship. A hardship could be overcome in my previous example by changing the size of the lot, for example. Well, we can't move the gravel. The gravel exists where it exists. And therefore, the hardship exists solely because the strict letter of the law is not allowing access to it.
Okay, before we go on, I know Tyler Gurnant, Missoula County Treasurer, has a question, but just another follow on, Alan. So talk to us a little bit about gravel in Missoula County. My understanding, and I might be erroneous in this, is that there's still 20 years worth of gravel in the current footprint of the mining operation. If this was not allowed to expand, what sort of impact would that have on construction, abundance or supply of gravel in Missoula County? Is this the only, this clearly is not the only gravel pit in Missoula County or in western Montana, but what impact would be predicted to occur if this variance was not allowed?
That's probably a question that could be addressed by Mike and John Kappas and myself in different ways. The analysis of variance and hardship is specific to the particular landowner and the regulations affecting that landowner. And so it's a little outside the bounds of the analysis to say, well, we have gravel somewhere else, and so you should, as a landowner, not be entitled to extract the gravel on your site. But the practical answer to your question is that this gravel happens to be fairly, I was going to say fairly unique. That's a weird phrase. It is unique. It's sort of, to a certain extent, upon crushing and extraction, it meets current public works standards for gravel, and not a lot of the resources elsewhere do that. And so it's been a very valuable resource. It's got a good proximity to town, of course. We understand that Knife River is now trucking in gravel from Tarkio. That increases cost. It increases cost of construction. It makes it more difficult to obtain. Doesn't help with the county's climate goals when you're having to increase transportation and the CO2 from that. And so we've got a resource that is very good quality, that meets public works standards here, that is an existing pit. You don't have to move the equipment. You don't have to move the location. The DEQ permitting is in place and the like. And so it's a resource that's ready and available, that's right there. And of course, as I've mentioned, you can't move it. So there are a lot of cost savings associated with allowing the resource to be extracted where it is. And that's sort of the nature of this. I know John and Mike can speak more to the specific cost, for instance, the cost of tonnage to move it from a place like Tarkio and the like.
But Alan, what I heard you first say is that is, even though I've heard that argument a number of times articulated by others, that's not germane to the unnecessary hardship.
I think that's right, because the hardship criteria is applied specifically to the parcel that's being impacted by the regulations. And so, you could say, well, sure, there's 20 years of gravel left there, so do you really have a hardship? But the county itself is doing 20-year planning efforts and longer planning efforts of those next phases of growth and like. And so when you're looking at construction resources like this, you've got to look in a much larger horizon. There's also the opportunity to protect the resource from some other type of development, such as residential development, so that you have the ability to extract it before it's built over and gone. And so, but the parcel is, the criteria has to be applied to, is it an unreasonable hardship for this particular parcel and this particular landowner within this zoning district? Because if the zoning district did not exist, you would not have the power to regulate it, and you would not have the power to accept the mitigation and the conditions that are upon it. So, in a weird way, there's a real benefit to having this in the zoning district where you have those powers, because certainly an alternative would be to remove it from the zoning district, and the variance would not be needed. But of course, then you'd lose the ability to accept mitigation measures pursuant to a zoning variance.
Thank you. Tyler.
Thank you. And Alan, this is directed to you too. Well, in terms of the hardship, I'm having a little bit of a struggle with the sense that this is not, Western Materials doesn't own this site right now. It is owned by, I don't know how to say their name, I think it's Lebenguths. And so they're in a buy sell that I presume is contingent on this variance being approved. So at the moment, the hardship seems speculative because they don't even own the property. Is there a hardship to the Lebenguths, or what are the standards that we're looking at in terms of the hardship and who actually currently owns the property?
Thanks. Alan.
Yeah, that's a good question, Tyler. And certainly the way this worked and part of the process was, landowners typically gain an interest in real property by executing a purchase and sale agreement, which entitles them to then seek the approvals that they need to use the property in the manner that they deem most important to them. So it's very common that we are executing purchase and sale agreements right now, and think about all the area out there by the build grant. All of that land is being sold on a purchase and sale contract that has a condition in it that says a condition to closing is that we are successfully able to obtain the entitlements. And so you put into all of those purchase and sale agreements a clause that obligates the landowner to sign whatever documents are necessary to demonstrate that the landowner is accepting and willing and appreciates the effort to get the entitlements. And then because in this instance, Western has executed the purchase and sale agreement, they have an interest in the property that entitles them to pursue this.
I might follow up with just one question, which is somewhere in the record, I noticed that it looked like, and I could be because I'm reading a transcript of the prior meeting that I wasn't at, but that the Laban Goose were looking originally to develop this residentially, and then somehow there was somehow they got connected with Western Materials to expand the gravel pit. Do you know the history of that, and is that something you can speak to?
I do know some of that history. The Laban Goose have also explored gravel extraction on their property over the years. And there's a real benefit to doing it in concert with Western. If each one of them pursue gravel operations themselves, they've got to have a setback from their respective operations. It creates some weird head wall issues and basically sort of wipes out half the ability to extract gravel because of these setbacks and the like. And so I know that they have talked over the years with the county about a particular variance for themselves. They've talked with Western about joining operations and the like. And this arrangement is what made most sense to most efficiently continue to extract the gravel in the manner that it's been done.
Thank you. Juanita.
I don't know, Shane or Jenny, can you speak to the uniqueness of the geology or hydrology or the direction of this proposed expansion? And the quality of the gravel.
That's
that
either
Alan
be
was
Shane or maybe even more appropriately the applicant. But
Would the applicant like to speak to this?
but I mean, I can only tell you and repeat what has been repeated several times that and it's in the staff report. There's a finding about the different kinds of materials that are all found on this site that are kind of the whole broad range of construction materials that are needed at a close location to the Missoula Valley.
Yeah, well said.
That sums
actually.
it up.
We have done test pits in that entire area, so it's not like we're guessing what we think is there. We have some good indications. The geology, obviously, just down that hill is likely to be because of the glacial sediments that came down and brought a lot of this stuff there millions of years ago. It's going to be similar, but Jenny's right. The quality of the gravel is such that it's unique in that you can process it to get to meet certain specifications that are required by Department of Transportation, DEQ. Different sections of DEQ also have certain specifications that are hard to meet. And as an engineer, we often have to shop around to try and find where we're going to get our sources for special projects, for certain kinds of septic systems, or if certain structural requirements are for the safety of the building that you might be putting up are necessary to meet. Does that answer?
So I guess if you just want to hang on momentarily, going back to you, Alan McCormick. So in light of what you said earlier, in light of what we just heard as far as the type of material here, again, is it even germane whether this is unique aggregate or material or not to determine unnecessary hardship? If there were 20 or 30 pits across Missoula County just like this that produce this sort of material? Does that make any difference for determining unnecessary hardship as you're reviewing the criteria for a variance?
No, I wouldn't say it's specifically germane. I mean, it's a component of all of these questions, right? I mean, it certainly the focus needs to be on whether this landowner can utilize the land in a reasonably practical manner, or can they meet the criteria for a variance. And so, the fact that there might be 20 other pits having this gravel out there does not require you or obligate you in any fashion to check the box no, because that isn't part of the criteria. The criteria is, do these specific zoning regulations specifically impact this property in a way that a variance makes sense? That's the question. It's just sort of on, it's an extra indicator, just like Mr. Koppas mentioned that the history of the pit was, important information to sort of factor into things, even though that history is not germane because we have a different owner and there is an operating pit there and latches absolutely does apply. But in this instance, that's the fact that there aren't 30 other pits producing this kind of gravel certainly weighs towards the equities of finding a hardship in this instance.
Alan, is there any I guess explain to me what the difference would be if we were today looking at a 72-acre landfill that over time has gotten to the size that it is in a residential zoning district. Would you be making the same argument that it would be an unnecessary hardship for the property owner to expand a solid waste dump?
If it would kind of, I'm not quite understanding from your question whether you're suggesting a change in use, and certainly a change in use would have a different set of criteria associated with it.
I guess what I'm suggesting, Alan, is the expansion of a use that's legally non-conforming, and I was just trying to pick an example that might be more readily seen as objectionable, but is similar to what's being proposed.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's more of a focus on the history of what's been there. Is the use changing or not? Is the resource there? I mean, we all know that a landfill has a very specific criteria for where it can go. There aren't a whole lot of places that were going to meet current EPA requirements for a landfill. So that does factor into the equities of whether it's objectionable or not, or whether it makes sense in a bigger picture. And I don't try not to be a typical attorney and just go on and wax poetic forever, but there is a lot of planning law out there about not ignoring things that exist. And there's a Ash Grove cement plant case where a neighborhood plan went in and didn't even mention the Ash Grove cement plant existed. It was as if it was gone. And the result of that litigation was that the Supreme Court recognized that you just can't ignore that some of these things exist and hope that they go away. And that was not zoning law, so I'm not trying to directly equate that, but there is an analogy here that when you've got a pit that's of this size, that's been operating for decades, latches absolutely applies, and it is where the resource is. You could say to a landowner who, to revert back to my original example, if you've got a lot that's 150 feet wide but subjected to a 200-foot setback, the criteria for zoning doesn't require you to say, but wait a minute, there's 400 other lots you could just go buy. No, you apply the criteria specifically to that parcel in that context, and you don't analyze whether there might be some other solution like buying another lot.
Thank you. Jenny, you have something.
Yes, to kind of continue this line of discussion about the criteria and hardship, your draft findings, and when the applicant came and spoke with me initially in July of last year, because the criteria address these three issues, I asked them to address all three because I think there is and your draft findings show this, there's a stronger case to be made for potential public benefit and special conditions. And the hardship argument is one where I asked them to really make the case. And as Alan has explained here to you today, that is their proposed hardship, or asserted hardship, I should say. We really keyed in more on public benefit and special conditions, and probably would suggest that we add the hardship or findings in from Alan, should you decide to approve it.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Josh. And I haven't forgotten the gentleman in the back who had some new information he wanted to share with us. Is this for Mike or?
I was going to ask Mr. Kappas.
Thank you, Mike.
Mr.
We'll let you sit
Kappas.
down for a second.
Kappas, can I ask Mr. Kappas?
Yes, Mr. Kappas.
We'll get to you, sorry. Okay, yeah, so no problem.
If we could just pull back up our PowerPoint, sorry.
And if you
Go
could
ahead.
pull that mic up close, it's hard to hear.
Yes, please go ahead.
So you said earlier that when folks bought places here, they did this with their zoning in mind. Did I understand you correctly when you said that? That zoning was important. They bought this with zoning in mind.
Yeah, if you want to ask the individuals, I don't want to speak on
Okay,
their
I thought
behalf,
that you
so-
said that.
I did say that, yeah.
Okay.
And so I've spoken with several of my clients that have indicated that to me. But I guess if you have specific questions for them.
Oh, I was just wondering if, so somebody moves next to a gravel pit and they did this with zoning in mind. The zoning says this is residential, but there's a gravel pit there and they chose to move there. I wonder what the thought process was, were people thinking, well, eventually this gravel pit's going to go away because it's not zoned properly. It's just an open question, because for the most part, I understand that there are some folks that have lived there for 40 years and predate the gravel pit, but just generally looking out at the folks here, there aren't that many people who are of that age, so they would have voluntarily moved there, chose to move next to a gravel pit. And did they do this with the understanding that, oh, it's not complying with zoning, so at some point the zoning is going to change? Or did they move next to a gravel pit going, all right, I live next to a gravel pit? And I understand that comes with a lot of the health consequences the nurse was describing.
And we see hands flying up in the back. If you folks could just hang on a second, we'll take you in order here. Yeah, hang on, folks.
Yeah, and I guess my short answer here is I was speaking to people that were not coming to this nuisance, that people that were there that pre-existed the creation of this prior to 1993.
Yeah, okay, and I'm thinking just that, given the age of people, and it's hard to make those judgments from 100 feet away, but it would appear that many people moved there post 1993. It was already a gravel pit, and I was just trying to, how do you put that together if they moved there with zoning in mind, but it was an active gravel pit, and the zoning says one thing and the gravel pit says another? Just wondering how people squared that.
Well, yeah, that would be a classic coming to nuisance situation where you move next to something and then complain about it. Yeah, that's
Yes.
not the situation that we're describing. And so I, like I'm saying, there are people that are multi-generational families here that have inherited property or successors in interest to their parents that have all been here prior to this thing existing when it began as a tiny little, remember, let's not forget, 3-acre site.
Right.
And so actually, if we could just skip through to the end, we never got to, I just want to respond to some of the uniqueness issues that you guys all just discussed. And I had been moving quickly and didn't go to some of my slides to not touch on all the topics for time. So keep going. You'll see there's a map. And this is from the Missoula County Growth Policy, right here. And this is a map from the Missoula County Growth Policy that identifies gravel resources in Missoula County. And as you can see, this site is not even identified on this map. There are not locations west of Old 93 identified at this site, but there are thousands of other acres identified. It's basically all of the alluvial areas of the greater Missoula area and for most of Missoula County. And whether it's relevant or not, the fact of the matter is this material is ubiquitous. It's available everywhere. And these sites are popping up every single day. And so if we look at just the proliferation of new sites alone in the last year, there isn't a shortage issue, and there's no evidence that's been presented that any savings would be passed along to the citizens. So.
Thank you, Mr. Coppes.
To be clear, you were telling me before that most of the people were multi-generational, were here before the gravel pit, and that the nuisance arrived around them. They didn't choose to move next to an existing gravel pit. Is that what you were saying?
So I can't say that I have surveyed all of the citizens, but I would certainly bet that some of the folks here could speak to that.
Thank you. So the way we're going to take it, I know there's a woman right up front who would like to maybe speak, and then I saw a hand on the right side of the room over here from a gentleman who wanted to share some additional information, and I know I saw a hand over here also. So let's begin right here first, if you still want to speak. Okay.
Thank you. I just had a couple things that I wanted to say.
And if you could state your name, please.
Oh, yeah, Tori Fort. I'm a resident in ZD40. Just to the gentleman who came up regarding the DEQ permit, he mentioned that the permits are just, so when they get an amendment to a permit, the DEQ takes whatever was predecessing it and they use it to amend or to continue whatever permits. Well, and he said every time that they come up, they don't have to necessarily bring in a zoning compliance form. So the only zoning compliance form that they seem to have is the one from 1993. And that 1993 one, when we saw it, was not in compliance. It said, it was basically a lie on the zoning compliance from the previous owner saying that this was non-residential. So it seems, and maybe I'm wrong, that the zoning or that the permits for all of these years have just been piggybacking on one that was a lie. So, and then I just had another comment about the 2008 document that was not found in the DEQ public's record request. So it didn't seem to be given to DEQ with all that information. And in it, it said that it would let it lapse after that time period. Well, if we talk about 2008, the amendment was in 2014. So it seems that the 2008 was referring to 2020 and not 2045, because they weren't talking about 2045 in 2008. They were talking about 2020. So when he went in 2014, he was, and the person who applied for it, Dan Hendrickson, put in the DEQ documents of a reclamation date of 2020. And yes, there are people who bought houses in the residential area with the zoning compliance in mind, because it states clearly, it's not unclear in the zoning ZD40 resolution about non-conforming uses. It's very clear. It says they shall not change in size and scope. So when you buy a house and you think, well, it's basically at its end and it's going to be reclaimed, that's what you expect. Because at the time, you don't realize that it was all piggybacked on things that were illegal in the first place. I had one more, but now I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, yes, I remember. Jenny mentioned earlier about this ZD40 being something that was done in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it's not something we do today. Or I think it's very clear. That's why we're here today, is because it is something that's in the law. It's something that all the residents around have been adhering to. That's why we have the nice residential area that we do. There's not a lot of housing in Missoula. It's hard to find nice places in Missoula, and it's a beautiful neighborhood. And if the other gravel pit wasn't here, it's a wonderful area, and I think it should stay that way. And that's the way the people have intended it. And there's generational people, there's new people, there are kids. I have a 1-year-old little boy who's 700 feet from a proposed asphalt plant. So I have everything concerned with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, come on up. And yeah, that would be you. We typically don't take additional public comment after we close the public hearing. We're making an exception today. So state your name and share what your thoughts are.
I'm Alan Foss. Since our first.
And if you could pull that a little closer, Alan, that would be great.
Since meeting you folks the first time here a while back, I've run into 8 other people that have been there for more than 25 years. I've been there myself since 1966. There was no pit to speak of until Western Material came along. There was a small pit, I think it was 3.5 acres. And as far as I was part of the group that's put the zoning in to start with. That zoning, we were told at that time, that was going to protect us. We were going to have 5 acres per house. And that is definitely not what's going on here. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, yeah, right there. Come on up.
Louis Arches again, and I just wanted to reference your comment about, moving next to a gravel pit. I moved into my property in 2007. I have 5 acres. And when I moved there, that gravel pit existed. It was, I believe I had heard that it was permitted for 15 acres. It was probably less than that. It was one-man operation with one little loader, one little dozer. And I wonder how it's gotten this big. And it specifically said in our zoning that the gravel pit, that any non-conforming uses would be not allowed to expand. So my thought was, gravel pit's not going to get any larger than the 15 acres it's permitted for. I found out recently that it was built on lies, but that's a whole nother aside. So I didn't move in here and say that I moved next to a gravel pit, now I don't like it. That gravel pit has been expanding ever since I've moved there. And my understanding was it wasn't supposed to expand at all. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. There was another hand back there. Come on up, sir.
Hi, I'm Kevin Sherman. And similar to the last gentleman, even though I'm an old guy, I just moved there about 3 years ago to McIntosh Manor. So to address your question directly, when we did our due diligence about the area, of course, we reviewed the CC&Rs of the McIntosh Manor development, asked our realtor about the surrounding area, and knew that we had the McCrae Ranch to the north of us. And as we understood it, the land to the south of us was zoned 5-acre rural residential. And those factors all, were considered before we bought where we did, the 2 acres we're on now. The gravel plant did exist, and I'm one of those guys that hates it when somebody moves in next to the railroad tracks and complains about trains. But I was told, probably the best information my realtor had, that the pit was relatively small and couldn't get any larger. And I can tell you, just in the 3 years I've lived there, it's gotten considerably larger. So, had we known this, and especially had we known that it could possibly double in its size that it is now, it definitely would have caused us to reconsider whether we wanted to live in that area or not. Of course, the final decision would have gone to my wife, but we would have reconsidered it, And if I could just take a quick minute about this undue hardship. I have a successful business in the aviation industry. We're heavily regulated. And if I had a project in mind to expand my business, and I thought it was going to be great, but I ran it past the FAA and they said, no, sorry, you can't do that. I would be disappointed that I couldn't expand my business that way, but I can't see where it caused any, not only undue hardship, even any hardship to me. I still have a successful business that I'm running. I just missed this potential for this opportunity that I saw, but unfortunately, due to the regulations, I wasn't able to do it. So I think this, it's a little dubious to say that there's an undue hardship here, when in my mind, as a businessman, I can't see where there's any hardship whatsoever, since the property isn't even currently owned, even though there's an agreement. Maybe it'd be like me having this idea for this project. I have nothing invested in it yet, so when it's denied, I don't see where there's any hardship. So thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Let's go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any additional questions today? And yes, Tyler.
I actually have two. One for Jenny. My first question is, it appears to me that there was also a gravel pit at one point on the other side of Highway 93, and that over the course of the zoning district grew and then was reclaimed as well. It also, the record doesn't really reflect or indicate that there have been complaints from neighbors about these gravel pits that supposedly shouldn't have existed growing. And I, speaking from the experience of living in the city of Missoula, if I build a 6.5-foot fence, I can be pretty certain that someone's going to complain about that extra half a foot. And that's usually how zoning is enforced. And so has there been a history of any complaints from neighbors regarding the growth of these gravel pits? And if so, how did Missoula County handle it? Or do you know that?
I am not aware of any citizen complaints about the gravel pit over the course of the 90s and until this recent project. The most complaint or angst about it actually came from staff as we were grappling with this 6.5-year gap and the resulting, excavation of a site. But during that time, I am not aware of any citizen complaints on the record that we have.
Go ahead, Tyler.
And just to be clear, I don't want that to sound like I am wanting, I really respect that you're not complaining about your neighbors all the time to Missoula County, so thank you. The other question I had was, I think for Mike
Mike, come on up.
So
Mike Smith.
Mike, from what I understood from your earlier comments, the estimated reclamation point for the current permit is 2045, but that does not mean that is when it will be reclaimed. And likewise, the estimated reclamation point, if there is an expansion, is 70 something?
2075.
2075. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that's when it will be reclaimed. Can you speak to, is there any hard date on which reclamation would occur? Or is there a hard date on which the applicant would be willing to reclaim?
Well, I won't speak for my client as far as committing him to that. But all I can point out is kind of what I said before. When we're looking at the final reclamation date, we can look at development patterns, growth patterns, uses, limitations. Sometimes these gravel pits are not like this one, and they are actually limited more geologically. So you just basically run out of gravel. So when you run out of gravel, when you've made your estimate and you run out of gravel and it's within that time, you just reclaim and you walk away. But like I said, more often than not, the expansion or the date, like I said, the DEQ won't let me put, even if I think I can use this pit for 100 years, I can't put 24 on it. But I can put a date where I can describe, based on today's development patterns and uses and all that stuff, I can say, based on what we know right now in this snapshot of time, this gravel will last us for at least 30 years. So we can go out at least 30 years with that date, or for the 2070, whatever the number is right now. So that's how that date is selected. I cannot say that there is a hard, I can't guarantee that date won't be extended, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make. Does that answer?
I think it kind of does, but I guess my follow-up would be, under the existing permit, in theory, it could extend another 30 years beyond 2045 with just what's there right now. Or is that something that 2045 you have to reclaim?
No, no. If 2045, we'll fast forward with no changes, fast forward to 2044, let's say. If there's still more gravel in the pit, and maybe construction has slowed down and we didn't use it as fast as we thought, or we were able to find different uses or different veins of it or whatever. Or go down deeper if we're limited in this case by groundwater. But if 2044 comes and there's still gravel in the pit, I asked the DEQ, I said, I would like to extend the life of this permit for such and such a time. And they, at that point, it's when the DEQ takes an opportunity to say, okay, well, we're going to look at your bond and you may have to give us a whole bunch more money or less if it's part of it's been reclaimed. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that.
Thanks. Yeah, Josh, and we're going to have some more discussion here. I don't want to get into a bunch of back and forth at this juncture. Okay, come on up.
I just wanted to talk to you about the
And
Washington
your
pit.
name again.
Oh, sorry, Tori Fort again. So the DEQ does have the permits for the Washington gravel pit, and it was discussed in the county commissioners' journals in 1976. And they did go get a permit in 1976 as the zoning was being put into place. They had a reclamation date that they respected, and they had a size that was clearly specified, and it was respected. So if we look at the juxtaposition between the Washington pit and this other situation that we're in now, you can see that one was within the zoning and respected the zoning and everyone understood what was going to happen. And the other one is obviously very convoluted.
Thank you. Josh.
Mike. Thanks. Right here, Josh. So I can't remember if what I'm about to recite came from our first hearing or if it's from materials I read or conversations with Jenny. It's all in there. It's just not quite segregated. So if I remember correctly, if you all were to get the zoning variance and expand, you would take additional mitigation measures on your existing 20-acre, on your existing pit. And what I remember hearing was larger berms, seeded berms, 300-foot buffers, getting rid of the beep, 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 going backwards, taking measures on that existing pit that would increase the quality of life for neighbors. And again, if I remember correctly, if you don't get the variance, you're not going to do those things. And you are pledging to do all these things on the expansion, and you wouldn't go into the expansion until 20 years or until the current pit is exhausted. You wouldn't be doubling the size of active gravel mining. You would just switch from one side to the next with these added mitigation measures.
And it looks like an answer is coming up.
Is that
the side of the
correct?
room.
Yes.
Come on up, sir. And if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, all that again. That was a joke. It's all right.
John Kappas with Western. I mean, some of the
relation.
Kappas, K-A-P-P-E-S. Little. So some of the mitigation efforts we've already put in place, like the backup beepers, when we heard that the neighbors were hearing that, we've got the silent noise. The mitigation for the wildlife corridors, we couldn't do that without the expansion. So that's going to be anything we can do, like the signage, we're doing that even without the expansion. But the higher berms along the south, that's going to take place with the expansion. The wildlife corridors with the expansion. We're also, to your question about going into the new expanded area, the new expanded area will go into quicker than in the next 20 years. And the reason why is we're giving up the 20 acres to the north. So we're kind of shifting. We're not doubling in size. We're going from, our initial application would have doubled in size, but with all the mitigation we've done, we're going from a 96 acre mineable area to, 66 to 96. So it's increasing by about 45%.
I'll just add to that what John was talking about for giving up the north 15 acres will be reclaimed. So that as you look from the south, if you look through the pit, you will see not a gravel pit, you will see reclaimed final.
So the total amount of actively mined gravel doesn't change. Is that correct?
Well, the actual disturbed area will essentially slide to the left, to the west. But because we're keeping the equipment in a certain area, and we're not moving that any closer to the residences, we have to, that has to remain part of that. We can't reclaim that part of the pit.
Right.
But the part to the north that we're getting out of, that will be reclaimed. And as far as expansion to the west, it will not be a leap. It'll be a little bit, and then, you know, mine, as you would think, you know, you've got a high wall, if you will, and you're digging into it as you move to the west. You don't strip the whole thing and then go down. It's more this way as opposed to.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the effects on the neighbors. Would they have more, would there be more impact than there is now? Is it the same impact just shifted?
It's going to be the same impact, just longer into the future. And what we're going to be able to do, as I talked about last time, and I think if you saw that when you were out on your tour, we have those piles on the north side that are sticking outside of the pit. If we're able to do this expansion, we can keep all of our piles on the floor of the pit. And the reason why is that north side, we had to get up and mine from the top down versus we're just gonna mine into the west. And so when you think about the berms all the way around, we won't have piles higher than those berms. They will all sit in the floor.
So you won't see piles.
You won't see piles.
Thank you. So just as a check of time, we still have another public hearing today, folks, that we need to get to. And I don't know if I'm personally ready to make a decision today. It's the prerogative of the Planning and Zoning Commission to either act on this today and move it on to the Board of County Commissioners, or we can hold it here and give folks time to absorb what has been presented today in both oral and written fashion. Thoughts?
I just wanted to hear from Shane and Tyler.
Yeah, Shane Stack, I guess I have a question before we answer, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And if folks are wondering, this kind of funky Planning and Zoning Commission thing is a feature of having the Board of County Commissioners, the Chief Officer of Public Works. We have our clerk and recorder and treasurer, Tyler Gernand. And I think we are actually, there's a spot for someone who is in this zoning district, but I don't believe that's filled. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, and this is a statutory scheme. The legislature gave us this opportunity to have this process back in the 50s, and it is awkward. And there should be 2 citizens from any zoning district, citizen-initiated zoning district anywhere in the county on this board. Missoula County historically has had 1, sometimes 2 members, but more recently, we just cannot recruit citizens, 2 citizens to be on this Planning and Zoning Commission. So by law, it's composed of the 5 people that you just introduced, Dave.
Okay. Thank you. Back to you, Shane.
Well, really, this comes from like I guess the points that have been made regarding the history of the existing gravel pit. And I'm pondering to myself, like, what if this variance wasn't being requested by Western, but like the Leibenguths, for instance, and there's no relation to the Western pit? How does, I guess, and I'm thinking in my mind, like, does that history really impact the request of the variance? And that's my question, is like, there's a lot of discussion about it. And so that's my question. I don't know if anybody has an answer.
Excellent question. Either Jenny or John Hart.
That's actually something that we talked about as we looked at that language that has been mentioned a couple times in the zoning, where it says legal nonconforming uses may not be expanded, and really kind of struggled with, well, can they or can't they? And the advice from the attorney's office that you have to be able to request a variance. So we kind of put ourselves in the minds of, all right, let's say it's not Western and it's somebody else asking for a use variance to put a gravel pit on the subject property. They certainly could do that. And so the expansion piece of it, while very important, it's not relevant to requesting a use variance.
Interesting. John Hart, did you have anything to add to that?
I'm going to try and restate this just so I understand it. So it appears after all this listening, and it's getting tired, and I may say this poorly, it appears after all this listening that the permits for this pit from the DEQ were built on a lie. That somebody in the early 90s checked the box saying, oh no, it conforms with the zoning, and it didn't. That's all built on a lie. And now a variance is asked for a different chunk of land. And it's kind of, as Shane pointed out, what if it was a different person that had nothing to do with this previous pit? This is a different, I'm going to say 80 acres, is that right? I don't want to get that wrong. 70 acres, sorry about that. So there's 70 acres right here. It doesn't conform with zoning. I want to mine gravel, so I'm asking for a zoning variance. I can apply for a zoning variance, and there's no law breaking by applying for a zoning variance. Is that what's happening here, or are we in the act of extending a lie? It's an open question from a non-attorney. We're surrounded by attorneys here. Very safe.
John Hart.
Well, I don't think we should assume that it's a lie. I mean, I won't deny that when you look at it, that is a very logical thing to conclude, but I don't think we should assume that it was built on a lie.
A mistake?
It was, yeah, maybe a negligent representation. But
and
I will. Yeah, I understand. I have children, so I understand the difference between some of these nuances here. But I would love to be able to say, and I have thought often in the past few weeks, that none of this history is relevant. But you've heard today that it is very relevant to those folks who are opposed to this pit, and they think that it is something that you should consider. And I'm not going to say that they didn't make an argument to that effect, that that it is something you ought to consider. So are we here? But all right, the other point I want to make is I don't think there's any evidence in the record that Western Materials has misrepresented anything. And I mean, I think they deserve some credit for at least trying to do this the proper way. This is probably the way that it should have happened in 1993. It's probably the way that it should have happened in the early 2000s. And so, you know, let's give them some credit for trying to do it the right way, and treat them like a new applicant.
Tyler.
I will add, just, you know, in terms of whether this was built on a lie or not, I guess I don't feel like that form alone gives us enough information to verify that, largely because it is a form. And so if anybody has ever tried to fill out a form with a government agency, oftentimes we don't allow you to make any changes to that form. So if whoever was applying for that, Mr. Hendrickson or whoever did it on his behalf, thought that he was a legal non-conforming use, I could read that form to say that. Now the expansion, I mean, my opinion on that, the expansion beyond whatever that little corner was should have come before the board to get approved. But I don't necessarily think that form itself is demonstration of a giant lie that he, you know, manipulated his way into getting this. I think there are other aspects that could be read into that. That being said, I obviously don't know. I don't know what was in his mind when he did that. It's also entirely possible it was built on a lie. So
one further question, just assuming a little thought experiment here. So if it were the case that none of the ground out there was disturbed at all, no gravel operation whatsoever, or any of these good folks who came to join us all afternoon here on a Thursday afternoon, if they were coming before us requesting a change in use in order to mine gravel within ZD 40, would that be any heavier of a lift to make the case for unnecessary hardship than what we are contemplating here today?
So first of all, let me just correct that what they would be asking for, not a change of use, but a variance to the ZD40 to allow gravel on a pristine piece of property.
Okay, very good.
Right? And our findings, I believe, would be the same. And it's not just hardship, it's public benefit, special conditions, hardship. Hardship being, I think, the weakest link of the three. But we tried in our draft staff report, findings in the staff report to give a basis that there are reasons to do it. I don't think it would be any heavier lift than it is right now, which is
okay.
Not sure it's saying.
Do you have to get all three, or is it?
So, pleasure of the commission. I'm leaning towards holding it in the commission, but Shane, what? Not moving this forward in terms of a decision today, or you could move it to the Board of County Commissioners, and you two would be off the hook then in the future meeting.
Them off the hook.
Could I jump?
Yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Just let you know, if you do decide to hold it either in Planning and Zoning Commission or in the Commissioners, the next opportunity, and I'd like to announce it today, a date certain, so that we can then put it on Missoula County Voice and not necessarily have to go back out and post and legal ads and all of that. So if you get to the point, my suggested date is going to be April 25th at the earliest, and I haven't consulted with the applicant, but we can push it out further than that, but no sooner than April 25th.
Shane.
I would just say I'm fine waiting another few weeks. I don't know.
I'd say I'm fine waiting, and I'd say these are two of the smartest guys I know, and I want them in on this. So sorry, dudes.
Agreed. We don't.
You
want them
sucked.
off
I
the
wouldn't
hook.
have said that. So.
So the question falls to Western in terms of scheduling.
Yes, that would be a Thursday.
Does that work, or do we need to search for a different date?
I have a 6 o'clock on the 25th, so we got to wrap it up before then. That's all I'm saying.
A different date. Okay, let's try again.
May 2nd.
May 2nd. Okay, we will recess this discussion of the Planning and Zoning Commission and reconvene this item for May 2nd, and we will endeavor to bring this to some conclusion on May 2nd.
I plead for a 2-minute bio break.
We will also take a recess of the Board of County Commissioners at this time. Thanks everyone for joining. It's super helpful information and has given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you. We'll be in recess momentarily. Are we ready?
Yes, sir. We are ready.
Okay, we are still meeting as the Planning and Zoning Commission. This next item is a use variance related to Terzo Farm. And as with the past public hearing or the prior public hearing, we'll begin with a staff report followed by an opportunity for the applicant or applicant's representative to say a few words. We will then have public comment, and that will be followed by discussion among the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission with a recommendation going to the Board of County Commissioners for final decision. So Jenny.
Thank you. So this is a similar kind of a project. It is simpler, but it's not without some complexity that I will try to be brief, try to get us out of here by 5, depending on public comment. But so this is a variance request in ZD 34. Location is 10380 Highway 10 East, Terzo Farm and Land Trust, Inc. Applicants are here. The property is located, this is a kind of a big picture where the property is. So what I know as Bandman Flats, I think it's Canyon Golf Course, East Missoula, West Riverside, the Highway 200 junction with Highway 10, and the site is about 1.5 miles down Highway 10, Piltsville area, so still Bonner. This is a little bit a closer look of the existing conditions on the site where I put 2 stars on the property where the 2 existing homes are located. This property is about 27 to 30 acres, accessed from the private driveway here and goes up to those homes at the 2 stars. The other thing I guess I would point out about this image is that it shows you the location, the context of this property adjacent to a subdivision here and here, Shady Lane, Buttrey Lane, and Highway 10, Railroad, and Interstate 90. And then of course, Bonner Mountain, what I call Bonner Mountain, steep slopes where this treed area is. So the property, as I said, is a Part 1 zoning district, just like the last one. It's ZD 34. The growth policy is rural, residential, and small agriculture. ZD 34 complies with that growth policy designation to the extent that the density in the ZD 34 is 1 dwelling unit for 1/2 acre, and that is also consistent with that designation. So there's that consistency. It's out of the regulatory floodplain and, as I mentioned earlier, accessed by Highway 10 East. The reason for the variance is in ZD 34, as in some other Part 1 zoning districts, there's an allowance for a single family dwelling, and our policy, county planning department policy, which was recently formalized in an interpretation or an opinion that our office uses, that just solidified and formalized that policy over many, many years, is that this reference to single family dwelling allows 1 dwelling per tract. And most often that makes sense because most people have like an acre or whatever. In this case, because it's so large, the applicant is requesting a variance because they don't want to do necessarily transferable tracts. They want to do lease or rental models for home occupancy. So you can see down here below that the space and bulk requirement for this zone is 1/2 acre. I'm going to actually, let me go to the next slide. It might show it a little better. They're proposing a future subdivision of this property where the outline in yellow is going to be a future lot 10. And I'm going to show you, this is what it's going to look like, but let me show you here first. So you can see where the existing homes are up here, and there's going to be 7 other homes kind of around this area that will be 24 acres. So that placing 9 homes on 24 acres meets the ZD. And so the hardship, special conditions, and public benefit we felt were met here, because this would be allowed if they were creating individual lots for sale. So the land use would be the same. It's just the ownership model changes. And the special conditions and public benefit of that are, we're in the toughest housing affordability economy that we've experienced. So we want to try to provide all those different opportunities. The proposed subdivision is going to come later. So we told them that they needed to do this variance first to allow for the homes on, as they imagine them to be placed on lot 10. This driveway here existing serves these 2 homes, will serve 2 new homes. Buttrey Lane will serve 4 new homes, and then a new cul-de-sac with the subdivision will serve the 9th home, as well as the other 9 lots that will be for sale if the subdivision is approved. This variance does not depend on that subdivision being approved. So in approving this, you are in effect allowing them to place up to 9 homes on the property, whether or not they subdivide. And it's still a zoning compliant, but for that plurality. And so staff is recommending approval of placing 9 homes on this property through a variance and with a recommended motion here, as well as condition of approval standard on all applications, that they just secure all other necessary permits. So just
Thanks.
that's
Jenny.
it.
Would the applicant or applicant's representative like to address us? Come on up and please state your name for the record.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
My name is Michael Maine with IMEG. That's M-A-I-N-E. I see that I'm joined virtually by some of my coworkers and in person by the applicant, Jake Terzo, with Terzo Farm and Land. Today, we're just seeking approval for the variance that would ultimately allow our client to place multiple dwelling units on the property. If approved, Jake has plans to propose a future subdivision as part of a future project. Approval will allow our client to provide diverse housing stock to the Missoula market. It is, as Jenny mentioned, it is important to note that the subject property does currently have 2 existing dwellings on it. And we really appreciate Jenny's staff report. And we're here to help answer any comments that we receive. And thank you.
Thank you. Oh, come on up.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Jake Terzo. I'm at 1501 St. Anne Drive. Thank you for taking this time to review our request. Thank you. If we could hold on there for a second. I just wanted to explain in my own words why I was approaching this subdivision from this perspective. This is the plot of land where I grew up. My family's owned it since the early 70s. The area that we're showing on there, that's the garden area, that's the most productive soil on the entire site. It's an original alluvial plain. The lower bench has streaks of topsoil, but it's mainly just cobbly, sandy soil, so not very productive. Ask us how we know. We planted oats and other things there and just never had any success. But we've since done a number of soil profiles across the property, and where we're proposing to place homes on the lot 10 are in areas of the poorest soil quality. And we want to keep that central area open for residents and neighbors to do the kinds of things that we did when we were young, having 4-H lambs and big gardens. And currently one of the residents has 6 mini goats, and we've got a large orchard that everybody kind of shares in the maintenance and production of. So I want to keep having that type of use for the property and those kind of opportunities. And I've spoken with probably about a third of the surrounding property owners, and I've heard a number of good concerns. A number of them I think I can address during the actual subdivision process and once we get past this variance approval, if you approve it. So I'd like the opportunity, if it's appropriate, to address any comments from the community if you'd like me to. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Terzo. Jenny.
I did forget to, this reminded me, there were 2 public comments that came in or that were added to your packet late. Actually, one of them was an email or a comment on Missoula County Voice concerned about impacts of additional homes and particularly the road impacts. And then I got a call from someone who was unable to make a comment online and asked me to convey to you concern about dust from driving on Buttrey Lane. Those impacts to the roads can be addressed during the subdivision review process, which is they're intending to go through.
Okay, thank you. Let's take some public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would like to comment on this proposal? Come on up.
Hey, good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Jesse Ramos. This is the first local government hearing I've been at since I got off council 2 years ago, but I thought it was super important that I come down and speak. Our house is actually the most affected property by far. You can see us right there with the cursor, whoever's doing that. Thank you very much. So we're the most affected property. Jake actually grew up in this house, and then due to some circumstances, it got kind of cut off a little bit. So we bought it about 2 years ago, And I just want to say that Jake has been nothing but the best neighbor we could have ever asked for. I mean, we share property. I mean, we don't even really look at property lines. We help each other take care of spots. I mean, in all the developments that I've seen in my time in local government, I mean, this is the most thoughtful one. Jake has asked for input from the neighbors as he's developed this. He's been very communicative with us, with me and my wife. And I just think that, again, you guys hit the nail on the head that we have a shortage of housing in Missoula. And sure, I mean, I would love to have this. A part of me would love to have this as just an open field. I mean, that road right there goes on our property. But at the end of the day, Jake has been great. We need more housing here in Missoula. And this is going to make the community better. It's going to open up housing opportunities for folks that cannot afford to live here. I mean, I just saw something on online a couple of weeks ago that Montana is number 5th in terms of average cost of housing in the entire United States. And if we don't start doing something as a community and starting respecting private property rights and expanding housing supply, we're going to be in a world of hurt. People aren't going to be able to afford to live here anymore. So I think that this is a wonderful development. I can't speak highly enough for it, and I'm in firm support of it, and I'm available for questions. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Jesse. Additional public comment. Come on up.
Hi, my name's Teresa Trineri. I live on Buttery Lane, and I also own property that abuts the proposed subdivision on the northwest corner. I don't really object to this subdivision, but I see no reason for a variance. This land can be subdivided. I feel Mr. Terzo is just trying to avoid the costs of subdividing. I've subdivided out there. I paid the fees. I went through the whole process. I didn't ask for any kind of variance. He can, if he wants to put rental houses up there. So essentially, he is creating business income for himself. I've lived out there for 30 years. My husband's family has lived out there since 1966. It's already zoned 1 house per half acre. And for the most part, that's the way the whole community is. There might be a few exceptions. There are a couple subdivisions, but in those subdivisions, they also have community sewer, community water. This is going to have, well, the upper part, I guess, is all that we're talking about. But it looks like on the diagram, well, first of all, everything that was sent to us was pretty much horrible. It didn't explain what the variance was. The map was almost illegible. The legend was cut off. And so you were kind of referred to look it up on your own. So we did that. And then it says on there for the 7 homes that he wants to build, they're listed as cabins. So that kind of concerned all of us. Like, what is a cabin? Well, I talked to Mr. Terzo earlier, and he said a cabin would just be a small conventional house. And we said, well, how big? Because we don't want that to be a recreational area, where people would rent it for the night or something. He assured me that that wasn't his plan. But I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we would like for him to follow the rules. Go ahead and subdivide. Pay for the subdivision. This doesn't have to be developed at all. I mean, it's been like this for years. It doesn't. And as far as the community and housing, I know that's a terrible situation, but 7 homes out in Peltsville, Montana is really not going to put much of a dent in that problem. So basically what I'm saying is we don't see a need for a variance. This subdivision does not have to be there. He can follow the rules of subdivisions right now. He doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to disturb his topsoil. But I guess it just doesn't seem fair. I had to follow the rules. So that's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Josh.
Just add one thing, ma'am. Just wanted to add one thing. If you've subdivided and you have lots, you could sell those individual lots, and Mr. Terzo wouldn't be able to sell these as individual lots. So I'm just saying there's a little apples and oranges there.
Right, but he could sell if he subdivided.
Can't if he doesn't.
Right, so I'm saying subdivide or do nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Sir.
Bob Jordan, and my wife, Michelle, back here. We own the property right across from where the two proposals are there on the east side at 2045 Buttrey Lane. And I'm not here to deprive him of any growth and progress of his intentions here. But I'd like to assure that the wells that we have there will still be sufficient in the years to come and stuff there for what he's kind of proposing there. And the safety of the area around there, the residents that are already there, the other community, if he does a paved road where they have good access for the fire department, police patrolling, or any sheriff's patrolling and stuff like that. Is a big concern, especially, and I just found out about the cabins also and stuff there too. And fire department would definitely need something to access that back portion there where his intentions are of putting those. So, like I said, I'd like to see more of it in writing rather than just the hearsay type thing so far. So if I could, thank you.
Thank you, sir. It looks like we have a hand up online. Rebecca.
Good afternoon, almost evening, commissioners. My name is Rebecca Ramos, no relation to Jesse, although I do live in that house there at the bottom left of the map between Shady Lane and Jesse's driveway there. So again, I also am not necessarily opposed to the project. Mr. Turzo came to my home and brought me a nice big map and had a conversation with me that I was grateful to have caught him and talked to him about it. I really appreciated that he came to talk to us one-on-one. My concerns are also largely around well water and fire suppression and things like defensible space. I think that Mr. Turzo's project is wonderful, and I love the garden area and the passion that he clearly shows for this land. But when we talk about the zoning variance potentially changing the zoning for anyone who wishes to develop this land, say this project doesn't pan out, and then he needs to offload this property, well, then we're back at square one with someone who's authorized to put X number many of homes on the land, but without the same well-intentioned plan that we're at now. So I guess most of those questions could be addressed in the subdivision, but again, I'd really like to know about well water and fire suppression plans for how having this many number of people on that lot, how that would impact us in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional public comment. Come on up.
My name is Anna Gasner, and I have the property on Buttrey Lane in the corner, the little triangle lot there. One of my concerns is with the well waters, because my well circle area, based on the map that he provided, looks like it's butting up right against the drainage area for the house that's supposed to go there, which concerns me a lot. I also have small kids who live in the area, or sorry, I'm nervous. Small kids who live there and are outside playing all the time. And my concern with if they are rentals, that people don't necessarily take as good of care as if they own the property there. And I worry about my kids and my pets and my animals and everything there. And people polluting my well water there with stuff in there. And their driveway is also going to be on my well water areas. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comment. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Jermaine Trenarian. I live on Buttrey Lane. We've lived there for over 60 years. We built that house. when we came in today, we talked with Jesse for a while and he answered some of my questions. We did not receive anything on this property, any notice at all. My daughter-in-law did and told us about it. So I looked it up, and what I'm concerned of is that these little houses are called cabins. There are no restrictions, no regulations on what kind of a place they build. He said he was going to build family homes, but he could build little tiny homes. And I'm concerned with the excess population on gravel roads. I'm concerned what it does to our property rights. I'm concerned about what it does to our wells also. Every plat out there has had to put in paved roads. And we're putting more houses on a small property on gravel roads. So thank you. Also on the garden, I didn't know what the garden area means. It's not really identified very much. He said it's going to be a place for people to walk or a place for people to have gardens. And I said, and mostly weeds. And he said, well, yeah, it's weeds right now. So what difference does it make? Thank you.
Thank you. Additional public comment? Anyone else here in the room or online want to comment? Sir.
My name is Andy Lukes, and I've lived on Buttrey Lane in a lot to the east, right next to the Trenaries. I agree with everything that has been said by the previous speakers. I think the planning is a good first step. I would like to see a meeting with the Turzos, Jake, prior to any action that is taken here to talk about his plans. I think it was good that he talked to several of the neighbors, but if he would have got together and talked to everybody, I think the process would produce a better result. So that's my comment.
Thank you, sir. Additional comment? Anyone in the room or joining virtually online? Come on up.
Sorry, I do have one more thing. One other thing that will definitely be impact is the wildlife that comes through. I know that those empty lots right now, I see a lot of deer out there and a lot of wild turkeys that go through. I just want to make sure that some of our diversity, wildlife diversity gets taken care of during this process.
Thank you. Any final public comment? Okay, let's close the public hearing. And before we go to questions and comments from the Planning and Zoning Commission, I want to just, Jenny, if you could answer a process question. There have been some comments about folks not knowing this was happening. I'm assuming, or could you describe the public notice comments related to a proposed zoning petition like this?
You bet. So the requirement out of state law, which we try to go above and beyond, we notified adjacent property owners within 300 feet by mail on March 13, and that has to be at least 15 days prior to the hearing, which it's April 4th, so that's more than 15 days. Also posted the property in 3 locations on March 15. Legal ad was placed in the Missoulian on March 16 and 23, and the project was posted on Missoula County Voice page on March 11. Like I said, we try to go above and beyond the notice to make sure, and then I also provided the list of adjacent property owners to the applicant, and they indicated that they were considering or maybe did go around to each of the homes that we we're going to be notifying by mail to let you know about the project as well.
Thank you. All right, Josh, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Jenny, could you speak to the issue on wells?
Briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike or Joe or whoever wants to pick that up. But I mean, if this doesn't come, I mean, I fully expect this to come in as a subdivision because this actually came to me first as a scoping meeting for a subdivision, and I had to just be like, time out. We got to deal with this issue first, and then the plan is to come in with this subdivision as shown on the screen. As part of that subdivision review process, of course, we look at ad nauseum at water issues and septic and all of that. If it comes in simply as a building permit, then the requirements are whatever is normally required for a building permit for water. And I think, Mike, do you have information about what you plan to do with it?
Mike, come
Or
on up to
Joe?
the mic, or Joe, whoever would like to speak to this. Don't go all go at once.
I guess, Joe, would you be able to help us on that at all?
Yeah, I can. Before the room gets any noise, the camera doesn't follow people, so I didn't know if Mike was walking up. Joe Denner, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I do work at IMEG, and if the question's related to the process for building permit, obviously subdivision review, as Jenny mentioned, it has the primary review criteria, all the environmental assessments, everything that actually happens during that review, which we're not quite discussing at this point. I haven't spoken directly with either the client or Mike about navigating, the building permit process if this variance isn't approved, if the plan for the subdivision doesn't come to fruition. That being said, the building permit process still requires a well and septic app. It still has oversight from the DEQ with Missoula County Health Department being the local reviewer. And there's all of the testing and requirements that go along with that. So it's difficult to separate out these issues, I understand. But as an assurance to all the public comment I just heard, whatever the plan is, there is direct oversight at the state and local level to ensure that water quality and quantity are in place.
Thank you. It just does not happen at this point in the process.
Right.
That's right. And it's very difficult to separate these two because you're looking at a plan and you're thinking of these things. But we're not quite there yet. As Jenny mentioned, scoping for subdivision resulted ultimately in this because of the singular tense in a 1970s zoning code.
And the
Thank you,
water
Joe.
quality and quantity issues that are going to be reviewed are impacts to those neighbors, to I mean, is that reviewed in that as part of that process? How is concerns addressed?
That's correct. So basically, and Jenny probably has maybe more real-time information. There's a lot going on right now when it comes to environmental assessments in the state of Montana. We're not going to talk about Broadwater this afternoon, but in short, yes, as part of the environmental assessment associated with any major subdivision in Missoula County, you have to address both, impacts on the property and to adjacent properties and writ large in the area for things like water quality, water quantity, wildlife even was mentioned. All of those things are factored into really a different bucket of review. And also, as just a little side note for all the public that can hear me right now, in the event that this deviation from the zoning code it is approved, there is another suite of public involvement that kicks off during subdivision review. And that does mean a neighborhood meeting where you'll get to talk a lot more with Jake. That does mean having another chance to discuss this or hear the discussions at planning board and ultimately before the commissioners as well. So there's a lot of things that the public get to comment on aside from a preliminary layout at this stage.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah, Tyler.
I have two questions. One, first one for Jenny, just to address one of the concerns was that we're approving, my understanding is we're approving this variance based on this plan. So if the plan substantially deviated from this plan, there would not be a variance for it. So the idea, in other words, the idea that we approve this and then somebody else comes along and does something totally different. Couldn't happen because this is approval for this plan, correct?
Jenny, is that correct?
Yes, in general, yeah, there can be some shifts here and there, but effectively, yes.
And then my second one would be for Mr. Terzo, which is one of the concerns I heard was regarding whether this would be, basically, it sounds like Airbnb or VRBOs. Are there any restrictions that you plan on placing on it? Is there, what assurances can you provide that this isn't going to be vacation rentals?
Thank you for the question. Again, Jake Terzo. I have absolutely no intent to do a VRBO or a short-term rental. These are really designed for long-term rentals. Our tenants on the farm have been, I mean, some of them have been there 10, 15 years, so long-term. And that also ties in with the intended use for the common area, the garden area, people that want to be able to, and want to have the opportunity to use a productive space like that. So I'll make that assurance in whatever way we need to. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny, to follow up on a question about fire or emergency response egress or ingress, presumably similar to water, that is something that would be addressed at subdivision or building permit. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also as part of this project, we did contact all of the agencies that we would normally contact, and none of them had any adverse comment on this proposal,
okay,
including fire.
Thanks. Additional comment? Or do you want to pull up the motion language again? And presumably this is to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners approval?
Yes.
Okay. I would entertain a motion.
I guess I'm reading the yellow part.
No, you would read the white part,
Oh,
and
white part,
and
there
it
we
would be,
go.
I move to
Sweet.
recommend approval. My mistake there.
I move to recommend approval of the request for a variance in zoning district number 34 to allow for more than one single dwelling on a tract on property located at 10380 Highway 10 East as described as in a warranty deed at book 1086, page 196. Based on the application, the findings of facts and conclusions of law found in the staff report and public testimony subject to the conditions of approval.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on the motion by the Planning and Zoning Commission? Seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, this moves, the Planning and Zoning Commission will be adjourned, and this moves to the Board of County Commissioners now. So is there any additional public comment at this point, as this is now before the Board of County Commissioners? Or Mr. Terzo, is there anything that you wanted to address?
Briefly, I do want to apologize for, again, Jake Terzo, for not getting to everybody, especially you, Andy. It was my intention. I travel extensively for work and had been gone almost over half of this calendar year. And then I was sick, didn't want to expose anybody, but I do plan on talking open to it, and Trenaries as well. Appreciate the comments and the concerns. And yeah, we'll work to address them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comment? Come on up.
This is Anna Gassner again. I just have a question. You said that you are looking for long-term tenants. But with the comment earlier in the meeting about the housing for everybody, how are you going to not discriminate and say, I mean, we've got a lot of college students that look for places to live, and I'm really hoping a dorm group of college students don't decide to go house in one of these houses and make it a party house. I mean, how are you going to not have that happen?
Mr. Terzo, you can speak to that as much or as little as you want. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Jake Terzo again. It is very difficult to screen in that regard. In fact, on the house I just recently renovated, there are graduate students that are doing a grouse survey that are just leasing for 6 months. So in those kind of conditions. I mean, I can't say that we won't have some of those type of situations, but I think that we will self-select, or the tenants will self-select based on their interest in the property and their use of the property and just the entire neighborhood. I think it's going to attract very long-term residents. So thank you.
Thank you. But basically no guarantees. Come on up, ma'am.
Like I said earlier, I'm not opposed to this.
And could you say your name again?
Teresa Trineri, and I'm not opposed to the subdivision, but I'm just disappointed and it actually sort of feels like it was already decided when you got people putting their coats on and out of here as quickly as they can.
But they are actually not part of the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay.
That was a different.
Okay.
The Planning and Zoning Commission was
Okay, I didn't know
adjourned,
that.
so,
I didn't
yes.
know that. But what I'm having trouble with is, why does he not have to subdivide? You could subdivide half-acre lots. That's the norm for the area. So that's what I'm really grappling with, is why he doesn't have to subdivide.
So basically what we were seeing
I
earlier.
feel
Go ahead.
is that I feel, well, he actually said to me to keep costs down. So he's creating income property for himself and doesn't want to, he wants to just totally bypass subdividing that land, and he's going to have 9 homes on one lot. The 1973 half-acre zoning was because that's what the people in the area would like to have. We don't want dense neighborhoods with lots of traffic and all the other issues that have been brought up here. I have no objection to it. I just feel that you need to honor and respect the zoning that's already in place and the zoning that are you laughing at me?
No, I'm looking to staff because I think we're going to be able to have an answer for you in a second.
Well, I just feel like that's what the people in the community want, is half-acre lots. We don't want a dense community. And I don't see, in my mind, I don't see any way there's a need for a variance when he can subdivide and have half-acre lots.
Thank you. There is a subdivision coming. And Jenny or Jake, do you want to speak to this? Really quickly, we need to move on.
This is just a thought, is Mr. Churzo, I know he has an attachment to this land, but he's not going to live there. I mean, we have to live there with this congestion. And so it's just a consideration.
Mr. Terzo.
Thank you for the comments, Commissioners. Again, Jake Terzo. So one of the reasons why I'm doing this to address that last comment is because my youngest son expressed a strong interest in living out there, as has my nephew. And this is one of the ways that I can subsidize my family and other people that I know, younger people that are desperate for the kind of housing that can be provided out there, but they're kind of hopeless in what they can afford elsewhere in the county. So that's part of my reason here. I could subdivide this entire property, but this exemption or this variance actually would result in fewer homes, because if I did subdivide, I'd have a much more intensive infrastructure design, which would cause me to have additional lots, especially on that upper field, which is very well suited for an interior cul-de-sac road and lots on both sides. I don't want to do that for the reasons I mentioned. So this is actually resulting in lower density than I would have if I actually went through a normal subdivision. And this is a subdivision for lease or rent. So we are going through a subdivision process. It's not like it's outside of the law. So there is a significant process. And yes, this is a lower cost option, but it's also incredibly expensive to finance and build homes of any type, even rental homes. So reducing those costs is important to keep it affordable for the community. And that may be a win for me, but I think it's also a win for the community and future residents as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're gonna, come on,
I'll be
Jesse,
very quick,
okay.
Commissioner. I just wanted to speak real quickly to the variance again as the most affected property owner by far, right in the middle of this. I am really glad that he's looking at a variance and not subdividing the land and selling it off to multiple different people. Again, affecting density, everything else. And just again, to speak to the developer's character, I mean, he lets us use his tractor, for instance, to plow the lawn, to plow the road. He lets us mow a path around the garden area and walk on, even though it's not our property. He has been communicative at every single step of this process. I believe him when he says this is what he wants to do. He's doing this. He could do a lot more. He could stuff a whole bunch of stuff in there if this was really for profit and he didn't care about the property and the neighbors. He could subdivide it and make it incredibly dense. But I think this is a great, thoughtful development. And again, I just want to say that I fully support this as the most affected property owner. So thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Jenny, could you clarify, this is what I was hoping to get to earlier, in terms of density. My understanding is it's erroneous to say that somehow what we're contemplating today would result in greater density than what would otherwise be allowed in terms of the number of dwelling units.
So yes, thank you for this opportunity. So there's an implied density with the minimum lot size that's allowed in this district of 1/2 acre. With this property being, let's just for round numbers, say it's 30 acres. You, in theory, with this zoning, you could place 60 1/2 acre lots on the property. Now, whether you could get sanitation and water and all of that is another story, but the density issue is, I think, is not really the issue. It's what type of home ownership types do they want to do, and they want to provide that wide range of opportunity as shown in this plat, where they have 9 1/2 acre tracts here along the cul-de-sac, and then a different housing model type on lot 10.
Okay.
Significantly less than what zoning would allow.
Can you go back to that? I think you had a slide, maybe it was the second one that shows the two subdivisions on either side of it. There we go. Thanks.
And actually, what I can do is we can identify, like, I can even identify people's properties and tell you. So that's about an acre and a third, an acre, 0.75. Yes.
Come on up, Jake.
Again, so sorry, Jake Turzo. Up to the east boundary of Buttrey Acres, where those higher density lots end, from Highway 200 to that point, there's about 50% of the developed lots that are less than 1/2 acre. There's about 40% of those lots that are between 1/2 acre and 1 acre. And there's about 12% that are above 1 acre. And it's a lot of larger tracts that have multiple dwellings on them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone online or in the room who has not commented on this previously? Okay, we will close the public hearing. Additional questions? Jenny, do you want to pull up the
yes.
motion language again?
Oh, sorry, guys.
Okay. I would entertain a motion.
All right. I move to approve the request for a variance in ZD 34 to allow for more than one single dwelling on a tract of property located at 10380 Highway 10 East as described as in a warranty deed at Book 1086, page 196, based on the application, the findings of fact, and conclusions of law found in the staff report and public testimony, subject to the conditions of approval.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is done. Is there any other business to come before the commission today? Seeing none, we will be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.